in being seen to take the fight to the so-called Islamic State group, given that this man was seen, particularly in the context of the UK, as very much a figurehead of that organisation.
Yes, and Chris, officially unclear whether there was indeed British involvement in this particular strike, but British military have been involved in targeted strikes previously.
Yes, they have. As you say, we don't have any specific information relating to how this particular strike was carried out and precisely who was involved, and it's worth emphasising that the sourcing of what we have learnt so far from the military side of things has very much come from Washington rather than from here at Westminster. But clearly Downing Street was made aware of what was going on as the process was continuing. They were saying just a couple of hours ago that they were aware that things were happening, but they weren't willing to comment. They're now acknowledging that yes, the Prime Minister will speak about it later. So that would suggest that they are increasingly confident, as much as they can be, that they've got their man.
Chris, for the moment, thank you.
It's 8:15. You're watching Breakfast from BBC News. That is our main story this morning. A senior military source has told the BBC there's a high degree of certainty that the Islamic State militant Jihadi John is said to have been killed in a US airstrike in Syria.
Storm Abigail sweeps across parts of the UK, bringing with it winds of more than 80 miles an hour. And on the subject of storms, who better to tell us what it's really been like and what it's looking like over the next couple of days? Carol, what's the picture?
Well, this morning still pretty windy, Charlie. Good morning. Here is Abigail. It's continuing to move northeastwards, but look at all those isobars across the country. It's going to be a windy day wherever you are. It's now peaked, but it still is very windy across parts of northern Scotland, particularly the Northern Isles. If you're in an oil rig, for example, in the North Sea, some huge waves, still very gusty winds for you. And we've also got a weather front which is drifting from the west to the east across England and Wales. That's producing some heavy showers, will continue to do so as it moves away, and it's going to be accompanied by squally winds, so sudden gusts of very windy conditions. Now, we've had showers across northern and western Scotland, Northern Ireland. Some of those have been falling as snow. For example, in Dalwhinnie, it's snowing at the moment. And with the combination of the wind and the showers, well, it could lead to some rather tricky driving conditions or travelling conditions generally. And you can keep up to date with what's happening where you are on your BBC local radio station. So if we pick up this band of rain, it continues to move from the west towards the east across England and Wales. Some of it will be heavy and thundery. Across the north of the country, we do have some showers as well. Some of those will be falling as snow above about 400 metres in Scotland and the hills and mountains. But even at lower levels, we'll see a wintry mix. And by that, I mean a mixture of hail and sleet. In between, there'll be some drier conditions, but it still is going to be windy. Only slowly today will the winds moderate, particularly across northern Scotland. Across the Pennines, the hills in the Lake District, we'll see some snow on the very top. Same for the hills of Northern Ireland. A lot of showers around too. And then we'll see some sunshine across Wales and southwest England. But don't be fooled, it's still going to be pretty windy, and we still will see some showers, and showers continuing to drift from the west towards the east through the afternoon. Now, temperatures roughly between about 8 and 12, but in the wind, it's going to feel much colder than it has done. Temperatures at this stage in November between 8 and 12 aren't that unusual. Now, there is snow in the hills in the north, but compared to what we've had in the last few weeks, it will feel much colder. Now, as we head on into the weekend, we've got the remnants of ex-Hurricane Kate coming our way in the form of this area of low pressure. You can see the fronts associated with that low pressure and also the isobars, telling us it's going to be wet and it's going to be windy. But because this is the remnants of an ex-hurricane, it's got tropical air mixed into it, so the temperatures will start to come back from the south. So for Saturday, we start off on a dry and relatively bright note across some northern and eastern areas, but the fronts start to show its hand and in comes the rain. Now, the rain will be heavy, particularly across parts of northern England, more especially Cumbria and Lancashire, parts of the Pennines and also North Wales, accompanied by gusty winds. North of that in Scotland, we're still in the cooler conditions and also the drier conditions. Windy coming in across the southwestern approaches. And then as we move into Sunday, we still have the weather fronts across us. It still is going to be windy as well. But I've taken the wind dryers off to show you the rain. Again, we're looking at quite a lot of rain across parts of northwest England, North Wales and southwest Scotland. This could lead to some problems with surface water flooding and possibly river flooding as well. So if you're travelling this weekend, do keep in touch with the weather forecast. Nugget and Charlie.
Will do, Carol. Got a question for you. You know, Children in Need, the theme is superheroes or people we admired when we were younger. Was Michael Fish yours?
No, Jerry from Tom and Jerry was.
Why? Why did you want to be like Jerry?
I love the way he outfoxed Tom every time. He was so cute as well.
It's a good one, actually.
If only you'd been here yesterday, Carol, as in here in the studio, you could have dressed up in a costume for us, because we'll be dressing up. Do you want to see? I think we're going to see Louise now in her outfit. Have a look at this, Carol. Look at that.
She looks great.
Dressed up as Wonder Woman. That was her superhero saying she was a strong woman, fought for good, and so she got to dress up in it. We've had loads of fun, actually. We'll be showing them.
Yeah, Childhood Heroes is the theme. What was it that Wonder Woman was able to do? It was something to do with her wrist. Couldn't she defend herself with her wrist or something? There was something she did. You don't know what I'm talking about, do you?
I just thought she spun around.
Yeah, and I think she had she had like a whip that was a truth whip or something, wasn't it? Have I made all that up? I don't know. I don't know.
Let's escape. Let's go to Joanna Goslin, who's on for Victoria, Derbyshire at 9:15 this morning. Joanna, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. It feels rude intruding on Charlie's private reminiscences of Wonder Woman, but let's tell you what is on the programme today. As Russia waits to hear if its athletes will be banned from the sport following doping allegations, we'll ask a group of British athletes, coaches and officials what they want to happen. Plus, throughout the programme, we'll bring you the latest on the US drone strike on the British militant known as Jihadi John. And we'll be live at Bristol Crown Court as Nathan Matthews and his girlfriend Shauna Hoare are sentenced for killing Becky Watts. Join us straight after breakfast at 9:15 on BBC Two, the BBC News channel and online. See you later.
Joanna, see you later.
Listen, Joanna, I think it's true. I think she did have I think she had some kind of a lasso or something that she put around, she just put up and then had to tell the truth.
Joanna, do you just think he's digging himself a bigger hole?
I think he should let it go.
Let it go. Absolute good advice there. Thanks, Joanna.
We will see, incidentally. We saw Louise in that fantastic Wonder Woman outfit. We're going to see Bill a little later on. You'll see what he dressed up in and pictures of ourselves in our childhood hero outfits.
It is one of the biggest events in live television. Tonight, stars from the world of music and entertainment will turn out for this year's Children in Need.
Yes, last year's show raised more than £50 million to help vulnerable children from all over the UK.
And one man doing his bit, he's facing his fears actually, is Radio 1 DJ Scott Mills. He's going to attempt to abseil more than 100 metres down London's orbit, all because Sir Terry Wogan told him to. We're going to talk to him in a moment, see how he got on with this training with the Royal Marines.
You can't really say no when Sir Terry Wogan offers you up a challenge for Children in Need, but now it's come to the day of the training.
Get your hips down!
I would probably do anything to get out of this at this point.
Knees on the rope, let's get up there! Up we go, Mel, 3, 2, 1, get over there! Think of Blackpool Tower!
I'm the kind of guy that would only go on the teacups at the fairground. And I don't do roller coasters.
Oh, God.
I don't do heights.
Good effort.
I guess I just don't look down, right? Oh no, my legs.
How long's Children in Need on TV for?
So there he was in train. We can talk to Scott now. Very morning, Scott. It's outside Broadcasting House for us. We saw a little bit of you in action. How worried are you? On a scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you about today?
I'm saying that I'm an 11 right now. I woke up this morning and I was like, oh no, today's the day. So I'm smiling right now, but probably not on this very channel this evening. I will look petrified because I genuinely am.
I think Pudsey is laughing at your expense immediately behind you. He seems to find the whole thing very amusing, your hardship.
Yeah, Pudsey's just, Pudsey's got a long day ahead and he's just smiling and laughing and joking. We've kind of made friends. But yeah, tonight's going to be an interesting one because the venue has moved really last minute. So it was going to be Blackpool Tower. We couldn't do that because of the high winds. So yesterday I was told it's going to be the Orbit, which I'm abseiling off, which is that big red building in the Olympic Park. What I didn't know is there are lots of different types of abseiling. So the training that I've been doing over the last 2 weeks with the Royal Marines, it's kind of had to go out the window because they use completely different equipment on the Orbit, which is what I'm doing tonight. So I went there last night, not to the Orbit, to like a local fire station to try and abseil off a tower using the new equipment. So that's kind of made it worse.
And Scott, something tells me there'll be some people who might have paid even more to see you do it in high winds.
Well, that is true, but I think from a health and safety point of view, we had to kind of call that off, and they obviously knew. They were looking at the forecast on Monday, and that's when it got called off. So, I mean, the Orbit is still pretty terrifying in high.
And you're part of this is the Jeopardy element of it. But it's going to be a great night, isn't it? There's an awful lot else happening.
There's so much going on. I know that Strictly are doing a Corn the Midwife special. There's the normal kind of knees up round at the Queen Vic on EastEnders. Ellie Goulding and Selena Gomez performing. So we've got to try and top that total of last year. But yes, I'll be the one looking really scared.
Yeah, we're good. We wish you all the best. Have you got a little ritual you're going to do immediately before you go off the top? Have you got a countdown or what's going to happen?
I've just been told to find a spot on the wall or something in front of me, look at that, and then just fall back and see what happens.
Yes, we wish you well. Good luck.
Thank you.
That's got Bills.
He looks petrified.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he?
Poor guy. Just shows how much he's doing. It was good for him. We've been getting ready for this year's event. We're getting into character for the theme of childhood heroes. You did see Louise as Wonder Woman, and Charlie gave an example of just how much he loves comedy. This is your childhood hero, Norman Wisdom.
Wow,
That's
look at
great.
that. Yeah, I forced myself into the slightly over-tight jacket, which was his trademark, and the little peak cap. And the face, I have to say, trying to replicate Norman Wisdom's face was tricky, because he did sort of rather gurn into the cameras. But he was my childhood hero, so there's Norman Wisdom.
Oh, you do it very well. And some of you have been sending in your pictures. Thank you. This is 6-year-old Reginald dressed as Doctor Who. Hey, that's good.
We can see Charlie Griffiths off to school today. Clark Kent, of course, very good choice.
Fabulous. 5-year-old Annabelle is a princess today for Children in Need. And also we have the staff from Willow Children's Centre Nursery in Wembley as their superheroes.
Trying to work out who's who there. Is there a Batman? There's a Batman in the mix, isn't there?
Zorro, maybe.
Well, I think I can see
Wonder
Peter
Woman.
Pan in the middle there, who's managed to...
Can you?
Is it? They're all there anyway. Good luck. If you're doing anything today, good luck, and it all goes to a wonderful cause, and we wish Scott all the best. We will see, incidentally, Naga's dressing up. Maybe you're guessing already what she's dressing up as.
Could do. Could do. We'll also clarify Wonder Woman's superpowers. Charlie, you've been looking into that. Children in Need on BBC One at 7:30. Let's get the news, travel and weather where you are.
Coming up next, it's the latest global business news with Business Live, followed by the news at 9 a.m. Then at 9:15, join the Victoria Derbyshire programme for breaking news and lively debate.
Hello there. Well, Abigail reached its expected severity and continues to bring severe gales across the far north of Scotland for the next few hours. It's very windy elsewhere, and that wind is carrying some really squally, thundery downpours sweeping across the country through this morning. Check out your BBC local radio station for impacts in your area. Rain, but also snow up over the high ground of Scotland. Quite a shock to the system after what's been such a mild spell. That snow settling down to around 400 metres or so. Wintry showers too for the high ground of Northern Ireland, the Pennines for example. The showers mostly of rain, but there'll be some hail mixed in almost anywhere as this band of showers moves west to east across the country. So early sunshine across eastern England will be swept away by those showers. Following on, there'll be some dry conditions, but the showers keep rattling in as we go through the night again. They'll be heavy and thundery across the north, and further snow up over the Highlands and Grampians, and then wet weather knocking on the door of Northern Ireland by the end of the night. A chilly feeling night out there wherever you are, that chill accentuated by that blustery wind. And then through tomorrow, very wet weather sweeps in from the west. The far north of Scotland stays dry, but for most other places there will be some wet weather arriving. It'll turn heavy and persistent across the high ground of western Britain in particular. Cold across the north of Scotland, but for the rest of us, after a chilly start, temperatures will recover. Now, we're very concerned about the prospect of heavy, persistent rain through this weekend across North Wales, northwest England and southwest Scotland. We could see huge amounts of rainfall up over the high ground, a very real possibility of flooding. We're going to keep a very close eye on that. The Met Office working closely with the Environment Agency. This is the picture for Sunday. A lot more rain across the north and the west, the best of the dry weather across the more southern and eastern areas. Despite a gusty wind, the mild air sweeps back across the UK.
Discover how World War I changed your world. Uncover amazing stories about the people and places where you live. The These stories, told through photos, audio and film, many courtesy of Imperial War Museums, are now available in the BBC World War I at Home interactive ebook. It's free, and to find out how to download the ebook, visit bbc.co.uk/WW1.
Hi, this is BBC Business Live with Alice Baxter and Erin Hazelhurst.
Yes, the crisis, fierce street clashes and rioting in Athens as Greece's economy slides back towards recession.
Yeah, live from London. That's our top story on Friday, the 13th of November. A growing mood of despondency in Greece. The country's latest GDP figures are out in a few hours' time, and they're expected to show that its economy contracted 1% compared to the last 3 months, wiping out the growth of the previous 3 months. Also in the programme, the robots, they're coming. Watch out, because they may be taking your job. 50 million jobs. That's the warning of the Bank of England's chief economist as technology advances. And shares here in Europe, well, there you go, they're opening lower on Friday, taking their cue from Asia, where a commodity sell-off dragged stocks down overnight. Investors continuing to mar the likelihood of a US rate hike next month.
Not going to take our job, Alice, and it is Friday, so we're joined, of course, by our tech guru, Rory Kethlen-Jones, who's going to be giving us his take on all the big tech stories of the week, and there are a lot of them, let me tell you. Hey, today we want to know, what do you reckon about robots taking over? Could a robot do your job? Let us know. Just use the hashtag BBC BizLive.
Yeah, very warm welcome to the programme. Thanks for being with us. Now we start with Greece and growing fears that the country is slipping back into recession. Some are blaming the harsh austerity imposed by the EU and the IMF. Others, a failure by Athens to stick to its reforms. Well, either way, the suffering of the Greek people is set to continue. Let's just take a look at the numbers involved here so you get a sense of the scale. Greece returned to economic growth last year after a 6-year slump, but it looks like that recovery is over. GDP, gross domestic product figures for the 3 months to September, they're out in just a few hours from now, and they're expected to show that Greece's economy contracted by around 1% compared to the last 3 months, wiping out the growth that we saw in the previous quarter. And it's a trend that could be set to continue. Both the European Commission and the OECD warn that Greek GDP will end the year down 1.4%, with a similar fall coming again next year. Now, this is the real worry point. A quarter of the Greek workforce, they are still unemployed, without jobs, over twice the EU average, and almost half of those under 25 are without a job still. Well, on Thursday, Greece was paralysed by yet another general strike over new austerity measures, with over 20,000 protesters taking to the streets in central Athens. Well, trade union leaders and many Greeks, they've turned on Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras and his Syriza party, accusing them of caving into lenders.
Good on you, Alice. Well, let's stay with this, our economics correspondent, a familiar face to all of us. Andrew Walker joins. Andrew, great to have you with. Hey, Andrew, before we start, we've got some comments from some of the protesters yesterday in Athens. Let's just have a listen to what they had to say about austerity.
I
believe strikes can backfire on workers, but there are some moments when people need to react. This is the time when people need to react. Enough already with the taxes, enough with the double talk. They need to let us breathe.
It's an expression of worry about the uncertainty and insecurity that prevails in our country and for the living standards of our society and people.
Enough with cuts to our pensions and wages. The Greek people must rise up and take to the streets, because the situation is only going to get worse.
These measures that the government wants to pass are measures that will bury us.
There you go. Now, Andrew, us outsiders watching and people around the world watching this program, watching that go, hang on, you know, they had a referendum in Greece, and they gave the thumbs up for the Syriza party to stay in the EU, to accept the bailout, which meant
and more reforms.
This money doesn't come for free, and now they're protesting again.
Well, there's no question, I think, that the short-term impact of austerity does aggravate an economic downturn. There's a big debate to be had about whether you are laying the foundations or not for stronger growth in the future. But and also do bear in mind that although there was indeed support for Syriza in the election, they did get a mandate to negotiate a programme with the EU and then to implement it. There was an awful lot of people voting against it, and simply because the rest of the country said take the medicine doesn't mean we can expect the others to remain quiet.
No, very true. Very, very good point. Once again, though, we've got Greece's European peers, the other countries in the Eurozone, who are quite vocally sort of, saying to Athens, come on, you've got to hurry up, you've got to hurry up, we've had enough of this. Because one of the sticking points at the moment is it seems like the government wants to allow people, if they don't pay their mortgages, they're not going to repossess their homes. Basically, the government wants to write off people's mortgages. Europe's not going to take that.
The European Union does indeed, and the IMF wants to see tougher rules that will enable banks to foreclose, to repossess homes when borrowers are in default for a long enough period. That's for sure. And it is politically very sensitive. There's no question about it. It is a general and very sad fact of life in most economies that if you do get into serious enough arrears on a home loan, you end up losing it. But yeah, this is one of the main big outstanding issues. Though bear in mind, I think the view at in the rest of the Eurogroup is that Greece has made a lot of progress. They've had several payments of money, and what we're looking at now is the last stages before the Eurogroup will authorise another payment to Greece, and in particular the release of up to €10 billion worth of money to recapitalise the banks.
Well, let's talk about that, Andrew, because just currently there's this €2 billion package that's on hold, isn't there, while they talk about the house remortgages and all the rest of it. The recapitalisation of the banks, in fact, the restructuring of the banking system, that's something that the Troika are saying is vital, aren't they? We're still not seeing the sort of overhaul of the financial systems in Greece that the Western creditors think it needs to happen.
They do want to see some reforms of the way in which the banks are run, governance as it's called, to insulate them rather more from any kind of political influence. But I think the really big question is simply getting the capital into the banks so that they have the sufficiently strong financial foundations to provide the credit that the private sector needs to expand. And bear in mind, this deterioration we've seen in the economy that we're going to get, almost certainly have confirmed in the figures we are going to get in an hour and a half's time.
Well, yeah,
that is very much underlying this further deterioration there has been in the banking system.
Because we saw this slight return to growth, didn't we, in the previous quarter?
Yeah, I mean, the previous quarter, the one view of what happened there was that it may have been a fair amount of spending driven by people getting money out of the bank before an anticipated bank closure. That bank closure, it did indeed happen, and that's done a lot of further damage to the economy.
Okay, Andrew, unfortunately we've got to wrap it up. But we're getting a step closer to Greece having to or the lenders having to write off some of Greece's debt.
Or simply extend the repayment period into the indefinite future.
Andrew, great stuff, mate. As always, Andrew Walker. Happy Friday, mate.
And you.
Yes. Okay. Let's just touch on some of the other stories making headlines all around the world. There's lots. We'll start with the German economic growth. It slowed slightly in the last 3 months, according to preliminary numbers. Europe's largest economy braved headwinds from China's economy and the Volkswagen pollution scandal. The German economy expanded by 0.3% in that July to September period on that quarterly basis, all according to the Federal Statistics Office there. That compared to growth. So they had actually growth of 0.4% in the previous quarter. That's why we're saying they slowed a little bit.
Yeah, well, let's stay in Germany, actually, because the car maker Volkswagen, it set a 30th November deadline for staff with knowledge about those diesel emission test cheating to come forward. Workers who get in touch with internal investigators by then, will be exempt from dismissal, according to a letter from VW brand chief Herbert Diess. US regulators found VW put in software that turned on emissions controls when the car was being tested.
Talking of Volkswagen, it's time for the old tabby. I'm sitting down today, so I got the tabby. You're doing all the work on the catwalk. So let's start with this because, and it just keeps going. You know,
it's the story that keeps on giving us
VW
emission scandal.
And what do they set aside? About $7.5 billion. And we've said from day one, right, that since the September the 18th that scandal broke, that's not going to be enough money. Here's what this is: a story about Brazil fines Volkswagen $13 million, which is a drop in the bucket, basically, compared to $13 million over emissions cheating. And they also pick up again, you know, Modi, of course, the Prime Minister, Indian Prime Minister, is in the country at the moment here. Yeah. But Belgium does more trade.
I know.
Diamonds.
It's day 2 of that 3-day visit, isn't it?
Okay, let's go straight over to Rajeshni in Singapore. And Rajeshni is going to talk to us about the markets. I think the markets in Asia are down in the doldrums, and we point one finger at the C word, commodities.
That's right. Asian shares took a big hit today from slumping commodity prices. The prices of key commodities, oil, copper, and gold all fell to multi-year lows overnight because there's a list of growing concerns. First, there's oversupply issues in the sector, which is looking even worse now because of slowing demand from China. And then there's the likelihood of the Fed raising interest rates in the U.S. in December, which is bad as well because it strengthens the U.S. dollar. Now, these factors combined have packed a pretty strong punch against the resources sector here. Shares are down the most in Hong Kong today, with the Hang Seng falling over 2%. Glencore shares there tumbled over 7%. And then there's also the big Sydney-listed miners BHP and Rio Tinto that fell almost 2%. So not a good day for the commodity sector today.
No, indeed. Thanks, Rajeshni. Well, let's stay in Asia now because Japanese stocks, they slipped on Friday. Look at the Nikkei. They're snapping a 7-day winning streak as investors shunned risk and cashed in on recent gains after a sharp drop on Wall Street. It was also a similar picture right across the region where shares slumped after Rajeshni was just talking about it. Those commodity prices plunging to multi-year lows on worries that slower global growth may worsen a supply glut, while US Federal Reserve officials, they kept beating the drum for a rate hike next month. Meanwhile, here in Europe, shares following suit, opening lower. The FTSE 100 here in London currently down just over 0.5%. Really focused on what central bankers have been saying on both sides of the Atlantic, with Janet Yellen on Thursday continuing to not give too much away. Well, Neda Tawfik can tell us a little bit more now about what's making headlines in the business world across the pond.
After a weak performance by Macy's earlier in the week, we'll find out Friday how department store operator JCPenney Co. performed in the third quarter. It's expected to beat analyst estimates, helped in part by higher sales from the beauty brand Sephora, which is in half of its stores. And we'll get an overall look at U.S. retail sales in October. Analysts believe Americans kept spending on cars and other goods, making it a stronger month than September. No wonder then that data is expected to show that consumer sentiment is up in November. And finally, the Labor Department will release figures for October's Producer Price Index. It measures cost increases felt by retailers, which usually gets passed on to consumers. That'll give a sneak peek on inflation and whether or not it's headed in the direction of the Fed's 2% target.
Good on you, Neda. Let's stay with the markets. Richard Fletcher, business editor of The Times, joins us. Richard, always good to have you with us. Let's continue on because it is the driver at the moment, the commodities theme. Down, problem for London's main market, the FTSE, it's heavily exposed.
Absolutely. So the FTSE is down about 6% since the start of the year, which is a lot more than US markets, and that's very much because we are more exposed to miners than other markets, and we have seen commodity carnage, as one market commentator called it yesterday. So London is more exposed, and therefore, you know, a lot of these companies are literally just plays on the price of the raw materials they produce. So copper's at a 6-year low, oil is again touching 6.5-year lows. So not surprisingly, these companies are seeing their share prices just continually fall.
Hence the drag it's had on markets around the world recently. Richard, just want to ask you about some of the European data we're going to have out over the course of the day. GDP numbers for France, Germany, Italy, Greece, culminating in the Eurozone at a Harlods at 10 a.m. GMT. What are we expecting?
So we get 9 countries update between now and 10, and then we get the overall number, which is expected to be 0.4%. So far, of the big ones, we've had France, which has returned to growth, so that was good news. But Germany was slightly disappointing there. Growth has stalled, which is what we expected, but nevertheless disappointing. I think the markets will be keeping one eye on these numbers, and obviously the Eurozone number as a whole. This comes ahead of Draghi next week, when we're expecting more easing from the European Central Bank.
Yeah,
Richard.
everyone's keenly watching whatever he's got to say, don't they? Yeah, Richard, many thanks. I think you're
Hang
sticking
on their
around.
words, don't we? You're going to come back and do the papers. Yeah, we'll talk to you very shortly.
Great stuff. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, still to come. We're joined by our tech guru, Rory Kethlen-Jones, who's going to take us through all the big tech stories we've had over the week, like the Facebook one, the drones.
Exactly. Facebook laser drones that beam out the internet. Can you imagine?
Yeah, well, you're with Business Live from BBC News. Let's go and take a look now at the UK news, because it's been announced that the government, UK government, has sold 13 billion quid of former Northern Rock mortgages that taxpayers acquired during the financial crisis. Who's covering that for us?
Well, the one and only Tanya Beckett. She joins us live now from the BBC's newsroom. Tanya, what more can you tell us about Northern Rock?
Well, if you recall, in 2008, Northern Rock, in the 5 years prior to that, had been running up quite a nice little asset book. So it had been loaning mortgages, quite simply, and it in fact become the 5th largest lender in that area. So it was the crucial difference with Northern Rock is how it was financed. It was financed through the wholesale market, so it didn't have people depositing money there. So the financing to that extent was less stable. And of course, there were criticisms of the financial regulation authorities at the time for not spotting this, and therefore how it was exposed. We know that it had to be saved by the government. Some of its assets went into Virgin Money, and some were bought by the government with the hope that as the economy recovered, those assets would become more valuable, meaning quite simply the people who borrowed the money would be more likely to pay it back. And that seems to be now the case, and it went into, as I say, a sort of bad bank. And the government says now it's sold 85% of those assets and 13 billion to a private equity firm. Now, what's interesting is the private equity firm, Cerberus, has now sold on some of that debt to TSB. So I suppose it opens the question, obviously, why couldn't the UK government sell it straight to TSB? That's slightly an unanswered question, only that financial firms are quite good at brokering around debt there. So that's where we are with that. Any hopes that it was going to pay down vast amounts of public debt should be put in context. Public debt is about £1 trillion, so 13 billion is really a drop in the ocean. In addition to which the UK government also has to sell off, of course, remember, the remainder of Royal Bank of Scotland. It still owns a 73% stake in that, and it's an open question as to how much it might get for it. But the word is at the moment that it will make a loss on that, whereas on this sale of assets, actually it made a profit of about £250 million.
Rumbles on, doesn't it? Tanya, for now, many thanks. Tanya Beckett there for us in the newsroom.
Okay, same-day delivery. Do you like same-day delivery?
I love same-day delivery.
I'm even happier with the Prime Amazon. Order before 6 p.m.
Yeah.
Next day, in the hand. It's
Yeah.
amazing. But this one is what?
We're all fully paid up members of the Want It Now generation, aren't we? The story in the Telegraph today, same-day delivery from Amazon leading the way, but other companies already doing it. We all just want it now, don't we?
We want it now. Don't want to wait. Don't want to wait. You are watching my glasses. Not caught
Take care
there.
there with
You're
the
watching
glasses.
Business Live. Our top story: an economy choked by austerity, or one that's just failed to reform. Because I tell you what, there is no end to the misery for Greece. Those latest growth numbers coming out of Greece are expected to show that it is sliding back towards recession.
Yeah, we're expecting those at around 10 a.m. GMT. Now, it's been a busy week for tech stories as ever. Facebook announced that it was working on laser drones. I know you're excited about that, Aaron. That will be high-speed internet access to areas currently with poor internet access.
Yep,
well,
and
the US.
Oh, no, you go for it.
No,
Keep
it's
going.
well, it charged 4 men in one of the biggest hacking cases of all time.
It's called sharing, Alice. But anyway, Snapchat got marked down by one of its most high-profile investors, raising further questions about the soaring valuations of private tech companies.
And we can't not mention it, can we? China Singles Day. Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba, that managed to sell a record $14.3 billion worth of goods in 24 hours.
Okay. He's here. We've bigged him up enough. We've promoted him enough. Now let's see if he delivers something. Rory.
Same day delivery with me, mate.
No. Let's start with Snapchat, because we often talk about the big valuations. Are they overvaluated, these tech companies? You're going to mention the word unicorn. Explain what's going on.
Well, the last couple of years, we've had this extraordinary phenomenon, particularly in Silicon Valley, where companies, instead of going straight to the public markets as quickly as possible, have managed to increase their valuations privately. And then you've
got these extraordinary figures coming out. A unicorn is what we call them. A unicorn is a company that achieves $1 billion valuation without ever going to the market. And what we're now seeing is that a lot of these companies, people are beginning to ask, are they really worth that? Snapchat in particular was worth $16 billion according to the market, according to the last round of investment back in May. Yeah. But one of the investors, Fidelity, has quietly cut its valuation. It's got a stake in the company. It's cut it by 25%. And we've seen other examples where companies actually do have to hit the market, do go for an IPO, and they then find they're floating at a value lower than had been expected before. One great example, Square, the financial services mobile payments product, run by Jack Dorsey of Twitter. Its IPO much lower than valued. Another one, Dropbox. So I think a bit of air coming out of that Silicon Valley tech bubble right now.
Okay, that's interesting. The number of unicorns that's just spiked exponentially, hasn't it, as well?
Yeah, they were supposed to be rare. There are now about 150 of them.
Yeah. I also want to ask you about Facebook's laser drones versus Google's net beaming balloons. I mean, for those who haven't heard about it, I just love the name of the project at Google. Isn't it Project Loon?
The Google one is called Project Loon, these great big balloons. But what we've heard about this week is Facebook's plan to beam the internet via drones and lasers to remote parts of the world. These two companies, these two extraordinary giants, they're really flexing their muscles. They both want to show that they're good people, they're good citizens, they're going to give the internet to places that don't have it, but they want to be first with it, and they're trying out extraordinary technology. So the Facebook technology involves building this single wing unmanned aerial vehicle. It's basically a giant wing. Yeah. It's going to be up there for 3 months at a time, just floating around, solar powered. Yeah. They're going to fire a laser at it with the internet from the ground, from a place which has got good internet. And they were telling me the other day that they've got to hit an area about the size of a US dime.
Yeah,
you know,
coin.
A tiny coin.
Yeah. It's like just a big button.
So there's extraordinary technology here. Wow. And meanwhile, Google has got its plan to do the same thing, but using high-altitude balloons. So the two squaring off. It just kind of shows, I mean, here are two companies that didn't exist 15 years ago, doing extraordinary things, spending a vast amount on technology. Facebook, one quick other announcement there.
I'm going to get this other one in.
Yeah. They've launched a new news app, Notify, in the United States. They're expanding yet again, trying to be a big force in news. All your notifications coming via Facebook rather than anything else.
Let's talk about the big hacking case in the US. Four men have been charged. What would this?
Well, this all dates back. Last year, we knew that JP Morgan, one of the great forces in world finance, had suffered a major hack, a big worry for it, obviously. This was on its sort of domestic customers. And now we've heard, and this, you always hear great colourful stories when the US authorities charge people. We've got this great long indictment outlining an extraordinary array of cyber criminality. 4 people charged, 2 of them Israelis. They've done a pump and dump operation using stolen data to send emails to people to pump up the price of stocks and then sell them, an unlawful Bitcoin exchange, an illicit payment processing operation. Just a great, huge cybercrime enterprise. It just shows how this whole thing is developing.
Wow. Pump and dump. Pump and dump. You don't want to pump and dump. No, Rory, great stuff. We appreciate your time. Thanks, Rory.
So much, Rory.
Have a great weekend, mate.
Great. Well, in just a moment, we'll be taking a look through the business pages of some of the papers out there. But first, a quick reminder of how to get in touch with us.
The Business Live page is where you can stay ahead with all the day's breaking business news. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest details, with insight and analysis from the BBC's team of editors right around the world. And we want to hear from you too. Get involved on the BBC Business Live webpage at bbc.com/business. On Twitter, we're at BBC Business, and you can find us on Facebook, BBC Business News. Business Live on TV and online, whenever you need to know.
Okay, let's get straight back into the papers. You've got a quick tweet because we want to talk about robots, right? Robots.
Yeah, the story in the Times warning that a huge number of our jobs, potentially 15 million, could be done by a robot. We asked our viewers, do they think that their job could be better done by a robot? And we've had a couple of replies. No, because a robot won't make a mistake. And without a mistake, we can't improve the process.
What about do your job?
Well, I was very pleased. A few months ago, someone did one of these online where you typed your job into a box and it put you on the graph where you're under threat. And journalism, actually, for once, isn't under threat, and we are well down the curve. You'll be pleased to know.
Some good news, eh?
So there's some good news in the world. There's some good news.
But robots are coming into the more mainstream, aren't they, nowadays? Yeah.
Andy Haldane, who made this speech, he's the latest person to warn of this, and it is a massive
Chief Economist
shift.
at the Bank of England.
Absolutely, sorry. And it is a massive shift, and we're talking about 15 million jobs is the figure today, but it's a societal shift, and also it increases the gap between the haves and the haves not, because what you expect to see is those jobs that aren't affected by robots will see their wages rise, but those that are will see wages driven down. So it increases that gap.
In about 30 seconds, Facebook in China,
Absolutely.
it really blocks more
In India.
content in India. I'm sorry, India.
Than anywhere else.
Key market for Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg was there last month. What I thought was really interesting in this story is that although Facebook blocks the most in India, they get the most requests in the US for information about their users.
Wow, there you go. See, a robot couldn't have done that, right? Because we're counting down on the clock here. We're counting down on the clock. And you actually finished, and we've still got a little bit of that time left. What do we do now? Richard, good stuff. Have a great weekend. We appreciate that indeed.
Yeah, you've been watching Business Live with Anne and I. Thanks for being with us.
You got more business throughout the rest of the day.
I do indeed. I do
Ta-da.
indeed.
Have a great weekend.
See you soon. Bye.
Well, Abigail reached its expected severity with severe gales and significant impacts across the far north in particular. Abigail is still there, battering the Northern Isles. If I move to one side, you'll notice another large clump of cloud out in the Atlantic, and that is set to bring copious amounts of rain to some areas through this weekend. Ahead of that, this speckled cloud indicates some really heavy, squally showers sweeping across the country through this morning. Some thunder mixed in, some hail, some snow up over the high ground of northern Britain. Check out your BBC local radio station for impacts in your area. Here's the big picture then. Those showers sweeping their way west to east on that strong and blustery wind. And yes, significant snow for the Highlands. It's not so much of a shock as it's November, but given just how mild it's been for so long, a notable change in the weather. Some snow up over the Pennines, parts of Northern Ireland up over the highest ground. Mostly of rain, of course, and at lower levels there'll be some hail mixed in. These showers moving in bands west to east, so despite a sunny start across eastern England, for example, don't be fooled. Those showers will arrive later on this morning. As we go into the evening, so those showers will continue to drive their way west to east on that brisk wind. It's going to feel cold out there wherever you are, accentuated by the strength of the wind. Temperatures down well into low to mid single figures, and then rain knocks on the door of the west of Northern Ireland, and that is the story for tomorrow. That wet weather sweeping its way west to east across just about all areas after a dry start, except for the northern half of Scotland, where it stays dry here but quite chilly. Now that rain is of some concern because it's going to continue to build up with time up over the high ground of western Britain. Somewhat milder air being introduced with that wet weather. But let's concentrate on that rain, particularly across the high ground of southwest Scotland, parts of northwest England, the Cumbrian Fells, for example, and indeed parts of Wales, Snowdonia, for example. Here we could see huge amounts of rain through this weekend, the very real possibility of some flooding. We're going to keep an eye on that one for sure, with further rain pushing in from the west during the course of Sunday, especially across these more northern and western areas where the totals will continue to add up. Further south and east, it will be drier, and again, for most of us, very mild indeed.
We live in a world ablaze with colour. I'm Dr. Helen Chersky, and I'm fascinated by colour. In this series, I'm going to uncover exactly what it is, how it works, and how it has written the story of our planet.
Colour, the spectrum of science, continues Wednesday at 9 on BBC4.
If you go to the movies to text your friends or have a three-course meal, or do your makeup and have a chat with your mates, then the film review is not for you. But if you go because you love films, then this is where we discuss all the top releases, from award contenders to no-hopers. The film review, tonight at 5:45 on the BBC News channel. Give us 15 minutes and we'll give you the movies.
This is BBC News. I'm Anita McVeigh. The headlines at 9. US forces launch an attack on Jihadi John in Syria. Pentagon sources say they have a high degree of certainty that he was killed. British intelligence has been helping to track the militant Mohammed Emwazi, who's been seen in Islamic State beheading videos. The government sells off £13 billion of former Northern Rock mortgages to a private investment company. Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare, the couple who killed teenager Becky Watts, will be sentenced today at Bristol Crown Court. The Indian Prime Minister continues his visit. He'll address 60,000 supporters at a rally in Wembley this evening. And Storm Abigail sweeps across parts of the UK, bringing with it winds of more than 80 miles an hour.
I'm Joanna Gosling. Coming up at 9:15 on BBC News, as Russia waits to hear if its athletes will be banned from the sport following doping allegations, we'll ask a group of British athletes, coaches and officials what they want to happen. That's in 15 minutes.
Hello, a very good morning to you and welcome to BBC News. US forces say they've targeted the Islamic State killer known as Jihadi John in an airstrike in Syria. Officials say there's a high degree of certainty that Mohammed Emwazi, who grew up in the UK, was killed by the attack. The Pentagon is seeking to confirm his death. Emwazi is believed to have killed at least 5 hostages, including 2 British men. Downing Street says it has been working hand in glove with the Americans to hunt down those murdering hostages in Syria, adding that tracking down these brutal murderers was a top priority. The Prime Minister is expected to make a full statement later. From Washington first, Laura Bicker reports.
Jihadi John became the masked militant face of the Islamic State. He appeared in sinister videos threatening Western hostages. The Pentagon says they launched a direct drone strike on his vehicle, one of many they carry out each week as part of an operation to combat ISIS. They tracked him to near the city of Raqqa in Syria. It's thought they've had him in their sights for some time. Jihadi John was once known as Mohammed Emwazi. He was born in Kuwait but came to London at the age of 6. He studied at the University of Westminster and was described as quiet and dedicated to his religion. He went to Syria 2 years ago. He was linked to the murders of the American journalist James Foley and British aid workers Alan Hennings and David Haines. Brutal killings which America vowed never to forget.
Those who make the mistake of harming Americans will learn that we will not forget and that our reach is long and that justice will be served.
But it's not yet known if this strike was successful. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Washington.
Let's cross now to our correspondent Gary O'Donoghue in Washington for us. Gary, hello. You're reporting that a senior military source is saying there's a high degree of certainty that they have killed Jihadi John, Mohammed Emwazi. What are they now doing to try to be sure of this?
Well, of course, officially on the record, they're saying that they're trying to assess the effectiveness of the operation, find out exactly what was done. But they do believe that they did get their man. And the reason for that is that they say they've been tracking him for some time. They've had him in their sights. They've known where he's been going to and from. And they're pretty sure that he was in or around this vehicle in Raqqa where after darkness fell on Thursday evening, possibly with one, possibly two, maybe more people in that vehicle too. And that's when this drone overhead let loose its Hellfire missile and took out that vehicle. And they believe that that took out Jihadi John at the same time. Now, what they'll do from now on to try and verify this is all sorts of things. It's unlikely they'd get any DNA from the ground if it was a direct hit, because, you know, there won't be much left. What they will also do, though, is they will try to listen to telephone calls, monitor text messages, emails on the ground. They also have human sources, human intelligence sources, people that tell them stuff in the vicinity around there. They will also tap them up to find out whether or not they were successful. And they will wait to see whether he turns up somewhere else. It's worth saying they have claimed to kill people in the past, and they have turned up later. So one has to bear in mind that degree of skepticism. But I think it's unlikely they would be this forthright to me and others from the region and from here. And I think it's pretty unlikely that Prime Minister David Cameron would choose to come out later today unless there was a certain amount of certainty on this matter in London too.
OK, Gary, for the moment, thank you very much. Gary O'Donoghue in Washington, and we'll return to this developing story later. But now the government has sold £13 billion of financial assets, mainly mortgages, from Northern Rock to a private equity firm. The government has now sold more than 85% of the assets of Northern Rock, which collapsed in 2007, marking, of course, the start of the financial crisis in the UK. The Chancellor, George Osborne, says the proceeds will reduce the national debt. With me now is our business editor, Kamal Ahmed. Kamal, good morning to you.
Good morning, Lisa.
So what exactly has been sold, and what does this mean?
So Northern Rock was split into a good bank, which had some rather good assets within it, and a bad bank, which had all the bad assets that pulled down the bank in 2007. And actually, those are just mortgages held by hundreds of thousands of people. So what they've done today is those mortgages have improved. Those people have been able to pay back those mortgages. They've been cleaned up, and they've sold them back to the private sector. It's about 120,000 people who have these mortgages. The terms and conditions for those mortgage holders won't change at all. Cerberus is the private equity firm that's bought these £13 billion worth of mortgages. TSB then, subsequently, the bank in the UK, has bought actually £3.5 billion of those £13 billion. So what it means is that the government is basically getting out of Northern Rock. It is saying that it doesn't want to run these mortgages. Government shouldn't be running banks, and we need to get back the taxpayers' money. We injected billions of pounds into Northern Rock when it collapsed in 2007, and George Osborne, the Chancellor, is saying that we will get that money back by selling these mortgages back to the private sector and allow banking to be done in the private sector where it belongs.
It sounds in some ways, Kamal, like quite a symbolic moment. Will all of the proceeds then be used to pay down the national debt?
That's what the Treasury has said. Of course, the big question is the taxpayer getting the money back that it injected into the bank at the time of its collapse? I've been doing a few calculations this morning to try and work out the answer to that. We paid about £30 billion to rescue Northern Rock. Even after this deal, there is still £8 billion of that still outstanding to be paid back. But there is a far bigger question. The banking crisis led to the economic crisis and the huge cost to all of us from that. The overall peak support for Northern Rock, worked out by the National Audit Office, has been put at £60 billion, quite a lot more than the direct cash support. And the National Audit Office says that £25 billion of that is still outstanding. So the Treasury still has some way to go to answer that question, did we get all our money back?
OK, Kamal, thank you very much for that. Kamal Ahmed, our business editor. The couple who killed Becky Watts will be sentenced today at Bristol Crown Court. Earlier this week, a jury took less than 4 hours to find 28-year-old Nathan Matthews guilty of his stepsister's murder and 21-year-old Shauna Hoare guilty of manslaughter. The teenager was suffocated in February and her body dismembered. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will speak to some 60,000 people at an event at Wembley Stadium on the second day of his visit to the UK. Britain and India have signed trade deals worth at least £9 billion. However, Mr. Modi's visit to the UK has not been welcomed by some human rights activists. Now, schools have been closed in the north of Scotland and across Orkney and Shetland by Storm Abigail. There have also been power cuts and ferries cancelled. Storm Abigail is the first in the UK to be given a name. There were winds of more than 80 miles an hour last night. Well, let's cross now to our Scotland correspondent, Lorna Gordon, who's in the Highlands this morning. Lorna, just tell us what the impact's been.
Well, not perhaps as much as you might have thought for a storm packing winds of the power that Storm Abigail had. I think part of the reason for that is the fact that it was heavily trailed ahead of time, and so people were more prepared perhaps than they might otherwise have been. That said, there has been some impact. You look at the waters behind me on Loch Broon, it looks pretty calm here, but further out on the open seas, and it's probably pretty wild indeed. So there have been disruptions, significant disruptions to the ferry services to the islands. It was quite wild overnight, even here in Ullapool. It was a bit of a hoolie in the wee small hours, the winds reaching quite high velocities, but the islands took the brunt of the impact overnight. People there were advised in the Western Isles to avoid all but necessary travel. Of course, the main concerns there being overtopping waves on the low-lying roads and causeways. There have been power disruptions there overnight. It's a bit of a movable feast. We think there's just a few hundred homes in the Western Isles that remain without power, but maybe perhaps as much as 1,000 homes up in Shetland who still have no electricity. And as you say, all schools in the Western Isles are closed today, as are all schools in Shetland.
OK, Lorna, thank you very much for that. Lorna Gordon there in Ullapool. Now let's return to our main story this morning. The news that US forces say they have targeted the Islamic State killer known as Jihadi John Mohammed Emwazi, of course, who grew up in the UK and is believed to have killed at least 5 hostages. Officials there in the United States saying there's a high degree of certainty that they have killed him. Well, we can cross now to our Westminster studio and talk to Professor Michael Clark, Director of the Royal United Services Institute. And thank you very much for your time this morning. Emwazi, of course, has been top of the wanted list in the US and the UK for some time. Give us a sense of the intelligence operation that has led to this strike.
Well, we don't know, of course, but the government have made it clear that they work very closely with the United States intelligence. So our own intelligence services operating on the ground, and of course GCHQ, who are listening to the chatter amongst known jihadists in the region. All of that material is generally believed to be shared with the United States, and the US shares material with us. So although Emwazi, if this story is true, that he was killed somewhere in Raqqa, it would be surprising if there was not at least a little bit of British intelligence involved in tracking him and locating him and confirming the fact that it was him apparently leaving an internet cafe in a vehicle.
The UK, of course, saying that it's been working hand in glove with the United States on this, but it will be interesting, won't it, just to analyse exactly what involvement the United States and the UK have had in this operation, if indeed it does prove to be Emwazi.
Yes, we won't know for certain what the degree of cooperation was, except in generic terms. The government certainly isn't going to tell us, nor should they, exactly what the sort of information was that was passed backwards and forwards. But the government have always been very clear that we work very closely. I mean, the phrase you use is their phrase, working hand in glove with the United States. And obviously that means that there's a degree of complicity. For those who think that these killings are extrajudicial, that implies a degree of complicity on the British part. But as far as America is concerned, these killings are absolutely legal because they regard themselves as involved in a war zone and at war with the jihadists. So for them it's not a problem. It may be an implied problem for us, but so far it hasn't really come to the top of the agenda in that way.
And of course we're seeing here again the use of a drone.
Yes, these are the most efficient killers, if you like, if you're going to do these operations, and also the most efficient listeners. They're the most efficient spies. They've got endurance of 15 or 17 hours. They can fly around at 25,000 feet. They can either fly lower and make it clear that they are there, which frightens people on the ground, and that can be quite useful, frightens the jihadists, or they can fly higher and just listen and watch. They are extremely useful assets, as they say in the military, and they're safe for us to use, very effective.
In a line, if you would, Professor Clark, if this is Emwazi, how much of a blow is it to IS?
It works both ways. On the one hand, it's a blow because it indicates that we will target people and nobody will escape us. On the other hand, he becomes a martyr, so there's some symbolism there. It works both ways.
Professor Michael Clark from RUSI, thank you very much for your time this morning. Much more on this story, of course, coming up. I'll be back at 11. Hope you can join me then. Right now on BBC News, it's time for the Victoria Derbyshire programme.
Hello, it's Friday the 13th, it's 9:15. I'm Joanna Gosling in for Victoria. Welcome to the programme. Coming up today, US forces have carried out an airstrike in Syria targeting the Islamic State killer known as Jihadi John, who appeared in videos showing Western hostages being beheaded. We'll look at the significance of his death if it's confirmed. Also today, it looks like Russia will admit to some of the doping allegations made against its athletes to try to avoid a ban from next year's Olympics. But is that good enough? We'll get reaction from leading athletes, fans and coaches. And should GPs be banned from prescribing homeopathy treatments?
Homeopathy is a great example of a medicine that is not known to work. In fact, it is known not to work.
We know from the science that actually when GPs incorporate homeopathic medicine, they get better results.
We'll try to look at the evidence of just how effective homeopathy is. Hello, welcome to the programme. We're on BBC Two and the BBC News channel until 11 this morning. Throughout the morning, we'll keep you right across the latest breaking news and developing stories. After 10 this morning, the couple who killed Becky Watts in a sexually motivated kidnap plot will be sentenced. We'll bring you the details as it happens. Plus, if you've experienced stillbirth, do get in touch with us. The government is announcing a programme to try to reduce the number of stillborns by 50% by 2030. We'll bring you the details of that. As always, your contributions to this programme and your expertise really are key. Texts will be charged at the standard network rate. Don't forget you can also watch the programme online wherever you are via the BBC News app or on the website bbc.co.uk/Victoria. And you can also subscribe to all our features on the News app by going to Add Topics and searching Victoria Derbyshire. Now, US forces say they believe they've killed the self-styled Islamic State militant known as Jihadi John. Mohammed Emwazi, the Kuwaiti-born British militant, appeared in many of the hostage beheading videos by the group known as ISIS and became notorious for his London accent and wearing a black robe with a balaclava covering his face. The US Pentagon says it has targeted him in a drone strike near Raqqa in Syria, and according to a senior military source, there is a high certainty that he was hit. But who was Jihadi John, and how did he end up as a jihadi?
If there were changes, they happened later. Certainly if there was anything going on while he was in school, the school had no knowledge or idea that that was what was happening, if it was happening.
One of Emwazi's victims was the British aid worker David Haynes. He was beheaded in September last year after being held hostage. This is what his widow Dragana told the BBC about Emwazi earlier this year.
I hope he will be caught alive. I think that's the only moral satisfaction for the families of all the people that he murdered. Because if he gets killed in the action, to put it that way, it will be an honorable death for him. And that is the last thing I would actually want for someone like him.
Well, we are expecting a statement from David Cameron later today. We can speak now to Charlie Winter, a security analyst specialising in so-called Islamic State. If he has been killed in this strike, how much of a coup would that be for America and Britain?
It'd be very important indeed. I mean, Islamic State really has championed Mohammed Emwazi as its figurehead in many of its most brutal, most notorious propaganda videos. So this man is a source of hubris, a source of pride for many foreign and local fighters for Islamic State. So if he has been killed, that would really be quite a crushing blow in terms of its symbolic value. Operationally, though, I don't think it would change much on the ground. I think Islamic State's leadership structure, its operational structure, is very opaque, and what seems to be the case for Emwazi is that he was important as a figurehead, but not so important operationally, not someone pulling the strings.
And why would he have been picked out as a figurehead?
I mean, purely because of the fact that he was someone from London, he had a British accent, he was very clearly ideologically committed to the group, and I mean, Islamic State's propagandists, they know what they're doing, they know what will cause the most outrage, so he was a likely candidate and someone who's suitable for the job.
We hadn't seen him for some time though, had he? And there was all sorts of speculation about what might have happened to him.
Exactly. Since January the 31st, when he was appeared in a video in which the Japanese aid worker Kenji Goto was killed, that was the last time we saw him. So there's been a lot of months that have gone past without him appearing, and there's been a lot of speculation as to whether he left the country, left Islamic State even. But clearly, if this airstrike did happen and if he has been killed, then he's been there the whole time, keeping a very low profile.
And what does it reveal about what is going on behind the scenes if this strike has got him in such a precise way?
Well, that's the other thing which is really important about this strike, because it really does point to a very high, sophisticated level of human intelligence gathering for the coalition, specifically for the United States, and that will have anyone who's anyone within Islamic State worrying, because it really does show that they're listening to the right people, they know how to get to the right people, and if they can do that, then who's to say that they won't get someone more senior, someone of operational value rather than just symbolic value.
Is it a sign that the intelligence is improving?
I think so, yeah. For a long time there has been a dialogue in the kind of intelligence community about how difficult Islamic State is to deal with, because it's very important to get human intelligence on the ground, and that was something which was lacking for a long time. Now though, with this kind of thing, and also the killing of Junaid Hussain, which was a bit less high profile, but back in the summer, still important. These deaths, these airstrikes do point to sophisticated intelligence, and that's really important in a conflict like this.
Would you expect IS to respond in any way to this?
Perhaps. I mean, obviously we can only talk in hypotheticals here, but I
mean, I'm thinking in terms of confirming or denying if he's such a significant figure for the group.
There's a chance that could happen. I think that given the way that Islamic State operates, I think it'll really try to manage the way that this comes out to the press, manage the way that their reaction is actually revealed, and I think they really need to make sure that they don't look like they've had a loss here. So I think that if they do make a statement, they'll emphasize the fact that he was one of their heroes, someone who attained martyrdom in a crusader airstrike, as they'll call it. But what's really important is that this is a big loss for Islamic State if it does come true, and big losses are really important in terms of the overall operation.
And are there any other high-profile figures that the US and the UK are targeting?
Well, I mean, almost every month we hear about an airstrike that's killed Baghdadi or an airstrike that's killed Adnani. We do know that the US, that the coalition is really trying to pick off the higher level targets in Islamic State. But as I said earlier, the operational leadership structure of IS is very opaque, so it's difficult to know who to target. But clearly the US is trying to do that, and it's doing so occasionally. So we need to really kind of look to have more tactical victories like this.
Thank you very much, Charlie Winter. Coming up, should GPs be banned from prescribing homeopathic treatments on the NHS? We'll look at the evidence behind how effective they are. First, this is the week in which, at long last, the Prime Minister set out the deal he wanted from Europe ahead of the EU referendum. Last night, the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, said it would be very difficult to reach agreement, and many other EU countries have responded with near exasperation. To many of them, it looks like just another chapter in what some now refer to as the British problem. So why do we have such a troubled relationship with Europe? Here's our political guru, Norman Smith.
She looked good, she looked fine. Fashions may come and go. Hemlines rise and fall. Prime ministers arrive and depart. But the one thing that never seems to go away is the argy-bargy over Europe.
He wanted the European Parliament to be the democratic body of the community, he wanted the Commission to be the executive, and he wanted the Council of Ministers to be the Senate. No, no, no.
For the last 30 years, Europe has been the great explosive issue of British politics.
The political argument in Britain is over. Every Democrat will accept the result. You and all.
So happy, and that's how we're gonna stay singing.
But why is it we're still banging on about Europe? Well, I guess part of it is no politician wants to be seen as a pushover when it comes to Brussels. So now it's the Tories who are unhappy, but it used to be Labour who wanted to get out of Europe. I guess rows over Europe are a bit like a well-cut suit. They never go out of fashion.
I think we just know that it's the way you are and the way you're just gonna continue being, because I understand personally, and I think people do understand that you want to have your word to say on the matter, and that you want to have, you want Britain to be able to speak for itself.
Elise de Beaumet is a French journalist living in London.
So how do you think people in the rest of Europe view us?
Well, I actually wrote an article about that once, so I had to ask French people, what do you think of the British? And they told me, oh, really friendly. Yeah, they're really friendly and a bit weird sometimes. You do stuff that we don't always understand, and we don't always understand your humor. But yeah, really friendly.
And how do people feel about our attitude to Europe?
Well, that is less friendly, I guess. We believe that you only want the benefit of it and not the counterpart, and that you are playing, that David Cameron is playing a dangerous game.
Of course, it's easy to blame our press, and yes, they do like to talk about bent bananas and balmy Brussels bureaucrats, but it's more complicated than that, isn't it? We have a sort of love-hate relationship with Europe.
I'm Nigel Farage. And I love Europe. No, I really do. The wine, the food, the excellent transport systems, the clogs, and the greatest golfers in the world.
Yes, even he loves Europe. But here's the thing, we love their wine, we love their food, we like their lifestyle, but we just can't stomach Brussels. And I kind of think that's because of our history and 1066 and all that.
But what do the historians think?
Well, if we think about the classic story of British history, it's about an island people resisting invasion from the continent. So it's beating back the Spanish Armada in 1588, the Battle of Trafalgar, it's about the Battle of Britain in the Second World War. And even today, I think there's a tendency to see Europe as somewhere that does things to Britain, that regulates our bananas, that restricts our laws. We don't necessarily think of ourselves as being a part of Europe.
And what has been the sort of impact of our loss of empire on the way we view Europe?
Well, when Britain created its empire, it was in a sense outgrowing the continent of Europe. It was stepping out of Europe and into the world and becoming a global power. So becoming a European power marks a shrinking of its status, a shrinking of its place in the world. It's receding into a sort of provincial, regional nation.
You know, I've been reporting politics probably too long.
Norman Smith, BBC News at Labour Party headquarters.
Far too long.
Norman Smith, BBC News, Westminster.
No, really, far too long.
Norman Smith, BBC News, Westminster.
But I make you this prediction, that whatever the result of Mr Cameron's referendum, I'll still be reporting about Euro rows and we'll all still be banging on about Europe for years to come.
Good old Norman, he's only got better and better with age. Thank you for joining us today. Still to come. It looks like Russia will admit to some of the doping allegations made against their athletes to try to avoid a ban from next year's Olympics. But is that good enough? We'll get reaction from leading athletes, fans and coaches. And do you need a degree to be a good copper? There's a suggestion this morning that police recruits should have one, but is it necessary? 29 minutes past 9, our main news this morning. US forces have targeted the Islamic State killer known as Jihadi John with an airstrike in Syria. A senior military source has told the BBC there is a high degree of certainty that Mohammed Emwazi is dead. Number 10 says the UK has been working hand in glove with the Americans to track down hostage murderers. The government sells off more of the Northern Rock Bank. Chancellor George Osborne says it sold £13 billion worth of its mortgages to a private investment company. Northern Rock's collapse and nationalisation in 2008 marked the start of the UK financial crisis, but the government has now sold around 85% of its assets. The couple who killed Becky Watts are sentenced today at Bristol Crown Court. Earlier this week, a jury took less than 4 hours to find 28-year-old Nathan Matthews guilty of the murder of his stepsister and 21-year-old Shauna Hoare guilty of manslaughter. The teenager was suffocated and her body dismembered in February. Myanmar's opposition, led by former political prisoner Aung San Suu Kyi, has won a resounding victory in the first contested vote in the country in 25 years. It's won enough seats in Parliament to form a government and choose the next president. The first storm to be named in the UK has been causing disruption to parts of the UK overnight. Abigail has seen gusts of more than 80 miles an hour in the Orkney and Western Isles, and hundreds were left without power overnight. Many schools are closed. Radio 2 presenter Dermot O'Leary will be stepping into Sir Terry Wogan's shoes for tonight's Children in Need. Sir Terry is missing the fundraiser for the first time because of back problems. Right, let's catch up with all the sport. Hugh has the details and we'll find out today what sanctions will be imposed on Russian athletics. Tell us more, Hugh.
Yes, good morning, Joanna. Just after 10, we'll have more on the athletics story you mentioned concerning Russia. I know we'll be speaking about it in more detail shortly, but they're set to find out if they'll be banned from international competition. It's hoped they can stop their athletes being banned from next year's Olympics by claiming irregularities around their drug testing system and blaming them on their old leadership. So it's sure to be a tense day for everyone concerned with athletics, I'm sure. Elsewhere in sport, there's plenty of friendly action in football. England have a pretty tough match away in Spain. Northern Ireland face Latvia, and Wales will actually be favourites against an out-of-sorts Netherlands side. But the focus will be on Zenica for the Republic of Ireland's Euro 2016 playoff first leg against Bosnia-Herzegovina. Ireland will look to join Wales, England and Northern Ireland at next summer's tournament in France. But it won't be easy. Captain Robin Keane's spoken about the intense and hostile atmosphere they'll receive. Personally, he says he'll enjoy the electric atmosphere and the players are relaxed and even confident. So we'll be speaking to the 5 Live commentator Conor McNamara, who'll be at the game tonight to preview what's to come. That and more coming up, as I say, just after 10. Joanna, I'll see you then.
See you later. Thank you. Now, it looks like Russia's Athletics Federation is planning to admit to some of the charges made against it by the World Anti-Doping Agency Commission in order to avoid a ban from competitions like the Olympics. An independent report earlier this week accused Russia of state-sponsored doping. The International Association of Athletics Federations, known as the IAAF, will make a final decision later. Here's a quick reminder about how we got here.
It's worse than we thought. It has the effect, unlike other forms of corruption, of actually affecting the results on the field of play, and that athletes are, both in Russia and abroad, are suffering as a result of that.
I was devastated, shocked at the level and the depth and the audacity, really. I thought people thought that they could get away with this, and that they have got away with it for so long, and angry on behalf of my sport at the damage that has been done to athletics by this, and I really do think that action has to be taken.
For 2016, our recommendation is that the Russian Federation be suspended.
This is my responsibility now. It is to create a sport that is responsible, accountable, transparent, and one that is predominantly and only in the corner of the clean athletes.
Последних событий, связанных с нашей легкоатлетической федерацией, то прошу министра спорта.
Well, we're just hearing that Russia says it's ready to carry out an investigation into the allegations in concert with independent organisations. The sports minister has been quoted as saying by the Interfax news agency. He's also quoted as calling the allegations absurd and saying that the International and Russian Olympics committees will make a joint statement on the doping scandal later. So, what should happen? How should the IAAF punish Russia? What else needs to happen to clean up the athletics image? And what does the future hold for the sport? We can speak to Eilish McColgan, a Team GB Olympic steeplechaser who's in Salford. Joining us from Sweden is Professor Arne Lundqvist, who's a former vice chairman of the World Anti-Doping Agency. Dave Collins, a sports psychologist and former director of UK Athletics, is in Stratford. Peter Eriksson, former performance director of UK Athletics, joins us from Canada, where he's now head coach of the Canadian athletics team. And with me in the studio, Diane Medal, who won 800 metres Commonwealth gold and competed in 4 Olympics and was banned and then cleared of being a drugs cheat back in 1994. And Jody and Bayo Furlong, 2 brothers who run a blog about the sport. Professor Arne Lundqvist, first of all, you warned back in 2008 of concerns about what was going on in Russia. What happened then?
Yes, I did. And the case was that they, just before the Beijing Games, were identified by IAAF as having a problem in the Russian athletics again. Just before the Beijing Games, the IAAF found that a number of athletes had actually manipulated their urine. And I, as IOC Medical Commission chairman at the time in the Beijing Games, held a press conference where I was asked about the matter, and this is a fact that has been recorded and everyone knows it.
But did you believe back then?
It's not the first time
Sorry, did you believe back then that it was the sort of state-sponsored doping that is being discussed now? And if you did, was it not properly looked into?
No, I didn't say that or didn't have any opinion on that matter. I only commented on it as a sign of something of an organized doping going on in that particular group of people. Where and who may have organized it, I don't know. But it seemed to me as an organized affair, because it covered so many athletes, and they never came to Beijing. I think there were six or seven. So it's not terribly different from the story that we have seen in recent days.
Well, hearing that, people will think, why on earth did it take so long for everyone to get a grip on it? 2015, now 7 years later.
Well, possibly when I spoke to Dick Pound about this in Lausanne a few days ago, he seemed not to be aware of or remember the story that happened in 2008, but it did, and this is a fact.
How do you explain it? Did people just not have the appetite, the will? Were they looking the other way?
Well, I don't know, honestly, and it was for the Russians, of course, to look into, and I hope they did, but now a new story comes up, so all I can say is that this is not the first time. I don't know in what way it, if so, was organized and by whom, no idea, and this was apparently never looked into by the Russians, which is, of course, those who have the first obligation to look into it.
Eilish, hearing that, how do you feel about the fact that someone so senior was first flagging this up in 2008, and in 2012 you competed against somebody who won your event and was subsequently found guilty of doping?
Yeah, I mean, it's disappointing, but it's not particularly surprising to me. I think a lot of the athletes who are competing nowadays have their suspicions and have had their suspicions for a long time themselves, but it's a positive thing now that it's coming out, because I think it's the more that we can sort of get these athletes and get them out the sport, then the better. And I think it's just a shame that it is taking 7 years to get to this stage, but as I say, I think this is a really positive thing moving forward.
You are trying for Rio 2016. How do you feel about competing against Russian athletes there?
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. Like if you'd asked me yesterday, I would think actually it's unfair to sort of ban the whole country. Obviously, I'd assume that not everyone is a doping athlete, and there will be some clean athletes. But after being subjected to a random drugs test last night at 11 p.m. and having to urinate in a cup in front of a random stranger I've never met before, it's sort of changed my opinion, because I think actually it's not standard. If that was standard across every nation, every country, then I wouldn't have a problem. But I think it's almost a little bit unfair as a clean athlete. You're doing everything right and you're following all the protocols, to then hear that 1,400 samples are just getting tossed to the side, and it's a little bit frustrating. So I'm sort of in two minds really of how I feel about competing against Russia next year. But the only thing I can do really is focus on myself and do the best I can possibly do.
Professor Dave Collins, as former director of UK Athletics, you have sympathy for Eilish. Do you think that the Russian athletes should be at Rio next year or not?
I think Eilish's position is entirely understandable, and as performance director 2005-2008, I know that lots of the athletes that I had the pleasure of leading were suffering from these sorts of concerns. I think the problem is, though, it's not just Russia. It's a lot of other countries. It's not just athletics. It's a lot of other sports. And when you sort of ask the very good question, if we knew about this, then why didn't we do anything? There has to be a lot of strong political work. Maybe legal problems notwithstanding, maybe we need to get to a situation where WADA can not only test and detect these things, but they can also prosecute them, rather than handing them over to an international, or in this case, a national federation, and saying almost sweep out your own stables.
Diane, you were banned and then cleared. Does that make you even more angry when you hear that athletes who are doping have been getting away with it like this?
Actually, I think we have to move away from this shock and horror approach. We have always had our suspicions. We've always known that times that athletes run have been a little bit dubious. And what this gives us now is an opportunity to look at how do we change that. Is it devastating for athletics and for sport generally? Absolutely. Is it surprising? Of course it isn't surprising. So what we have
the
to
level
do...
at which it was happening?
Not even remotely.
Not particularly, because in my experience, when your back's against the wall and you're being accused of something that you know isn't true, depending on whatever side you are on, you're going to dig your heels in. And so that conversation that you've been having with Arne Lundqvist doesn't surprise me either, because what we were saying almost 20 years ago, that this isn't, doping isn't about an individual athlete, it's not about coach, it's not about individuals, it actually starts at the top. And this gives us an opportunity to now follow the evidence, because that's key. Follow the evidence to say if it is happening at a strategic level, that's where the sanctions have got to hit, and they've got to hit hard.
Jodie and Bo, you're our super fans in the studio. You're saying you're not surprised?
Well, as fans, I think things have changed a lot in the last 10 years through technology. We know an awful lot more now than we used to. So we would sit at home shouting at the television more, but now you have Twitter and you have blogs and you have various ways that everyone can talk. We know an awful lot that goes on. If a report comes out, we can read it before. You used to get excerpts, maybe, didn't you, in the newspaper? I've got friends who've read like the 500-page report over at Mo Farah's coach, who've actually read the whole thing and then corrected journalists online. We know a lot more than we used to. We pick up on little things that aren't necessarily in the media, and we have now a platform to sort of voice our opinions about things. I'm not surprised about Russia in the slightest. In the slightest. In fact, the only thing that surprises me is that it's actually come out. Because 10 years ago I could have told you about this. Yeah. The fact that Arne Lundqvist is saying he warned about it 8 years ago, warning about it isn't good enough. People have to do something. I could tell you, and hundreds of fans who we know more about the sport than any of these so-called experts, any of the coaches, any of the people who are running the sport, because we live and breathe it. We watch it night and day and talk about it when we're not watching it.
Yeah.
I could have told you, I could name countless athletes we all know are on drugs.
Yeah. Well, you suspect, but we're
not in a position to prosecute. You know, we don't have the inside information, but we know. Obviously, if you are in a position of authority, you have to be able to prove stuff. You know, we're not in that position.
Well, let's go back to Arne Lundqvist then. I mean, have the authorities not handled this correctly until now, and can they really, how do they earn the trust of people like our fans in the studio and everyone else who's a fan of athletics and competing in it too?
Well, authorities have handled it in accordance with the limitations of the rules that are in place at the time.
But they're the authorities with the power to do something.
I know that IAAF...
They have the power, don't they, to do something?
Pardon?
They have the power, don't they, to do something?
Well, yeah, but there are rules that should be followed when you exercise that power.
There's rules that should be changed.
And first-hand response...
They don't even implement the rules they've got.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Sorry to interrupt you, Arne, but the rules are there. The rules are stringent, but are the rules being followed? There is no real will from those in authority, from those who can carry out and demonstrate those responsible sanctions and actions. They've never happened in the past. So it's not really good enough or strong enough to say the rules are there and we need to follow them. Action needs to take place.
You get the impression that people in positions of authority don't really want to publicise that there is a problem, so it's best to kind of cover it up, sweep it under the carpet so that the sport doesn't get damaged. Unfortunately, the sport kind of needs to get damaged in order to get better.
Well, let's bring in Peter Eriksson, Performance Director at UK Athletics. How do you see all this?
Well, I think it's a lot of things that's gone wrong here. And I mean, ethics is a problem on all levels, right? And it's a source of the symptom related to doping and corruption. Also the lack of will to change, and I think you heard that here. And also we can say that incompetence is a problem on all levels and a source of the symptoms as well, right? So economics is another issue that is part of this problem. And apathy as well. So I think it's different things that plays into the whole scenario, and that's the sad part of it. And I also think that, you know, we can ban Russia as much as we want, but I think first and foremost we have to look at all the victims that was robbed from medals in the previous games, and that's important, I think, to set right.
Eilish, final thought from you. Do you think this can be put right going forward?
Yeah, I think it can. I mean, obviously I love the sport, and I would hope that it is going to move forward, because I mean, we're the ones that are competing in it and living and breathing it each day. And the unfortunate thing is that obviously, as you heard from Jodie and Bayo, that the fans are disappointed as well, because they want to see a clean sport and they want to know that what they're watching is a level playing field, and me competing, that's exactly what I want. I want to know that we're all equal and we're all on a fair sort of playing field.
I think it's important to say that we were going to go at athletics today and saying we could try hard, and we absolutely could. But athletics is one of the sports that does at least try. If you could look at lots of other sports, the reason athletics gets a bad rap is because they try to catch people and do catch people and gets bad headlines. If football or rugby or any other sport tested the amount that athletics does, they would be as bad, if not worse. So athletics at least is trying.
Thank you all so much for joining in the discussion, and lots of people at home joining in as well. Email from Peter: if the Russians get away with this, nobody will trust a single governing body ever again to do the right thing without fear or favour. Being in denial for years led to this in the first place. Another texter: in fairness to other athletes, Russian athletes should be banned from international competition for a minimum of 10 years. It's obvious this has been going on for years, cheating other world athletes of medals that by rights should be theirs. Lawrence has texted to say it would be a shame and a disgrace if Russia was allowed to the Olympic Games, a slap in the face to those who didn't take drugs, and the fans, if they want to end drugs in the sport, start by dumping Russia for at least 10 years. Another tweet: Russia should be banned from Rio. If not, it's a farce. I won't ever watch athletics again. Cheats are allowed to get away with it. And Frank has tweeted to say Russia are ready to investigate themselves. Token slap on the wrist will follow. Keep your thoughts coming in. Thank you very much for all of those. And still to come today, the government is putting more money into training and equipment to prevent stillbirths. But is it enough? Now, it is one of the most controversial therapies offered by the NHS, and now ministers are considering whether to ban homeopathy from the list of treatments that GPs can prescribe. Homeopathy costs the health service around £4 million. So what's the evidence on whether or not it works? Well, James Gallagher is our health correspondent, and we're also joined by two other guests in the studio who are on either side of the debate: Simon Singh and Dr. Peter Fisher. James, first of all, just talk us through, actually, this most straightforward question: what is homeopathy? How does it
Morning, Joy. The idea is that like treats like. So we've got an example on the table. I bought it in a high street pharmacist on the way in, and that's arnica. So arnica is a plant which, if you were to ingest it, would damage the body. Now this will explain some of the difference between what a herbal remedy and a homeopathic remedy is. So the plant itself is used in some herbal remedies. However, in here it goes through a special form of preparation in order to make it a homeopathic treatment. So what happens is you take one part of arnica and then you add to it 99 parts of either water or alcohol, and then it goes through serial dilution. So you do that, you take one part of that and dilute it again and again and again and again and again. And the more you dilute it, the more powerful the effect. That's the idea behind homeopathy. The criticism, though,
the more you dilute it,
the more you dilute it is, the stronger the effect. So a 30C solution that's gone through 30 serial dilutions will be more powerful than this one here, which has gone through 6. Now, the argument is that your end product there is nothing but a sugar pill. That's the counter-argument, and say that this flies in the face of conventional science.
So what is the evidence, either way?
Well, there have been countless studies looking at this, and there's criticisms of many of them. But when authorities, MPs have looked at this earlier this year, the Australian government looked at this, and they've come to the overall conclusion that there is no good evidence that actually says that homeopathy works. Now, one of the big confusing factors you do have in here is that the placebo effect. So if I did give you sugar pills for something, then you would probably see some kind of benefit. And we see this around all kinds of things. So if you have painkillers, for example, we know that people respond better to branded painkillers than non-branded painkillers, even if it's got exactly the same medicine inside it. It's all down to placebo effect. The big question in homeopathy is whether it does anything more than the placebo effect, and those big reviews that into it say that it doesn't.
And just a word on the cost: £4 million a year to the NHS. It's a significant amount of money, but in the scheme of things, in terms of the NHS budget, it's a drop in the ocean, really. Why are they looking at it now?
Well, it is, and one other thing is that you have homeopathic hospitals as well, and that's where a lot of the budget, a lot of the money is going to. If you actually look at GP prescriptions, it's only around about £110,000 a year that is actually spent on prescribing it out of a GP surgery. And there are some drugs on the Cancer Drugs Fund that cost £90,000 for one patient a year. So when
that's
you start
across the country, 110,000 out of
exactly.
GP
So when you start
surgeries.
comparing the finances, you can argue that this is a drop in the ocean. However, I think this is a lot more about ideology of what the NHS should be paying for and whether it's based in evidence, and that's what George Freeman, the Life Sciences Minister, is saying, that these are tight times financially. We need to look at what the NHS is spending money on and make sure that it's spending on things that are proven to be effective.
Okay, well, let's bring in Simon Singh and Dr. Peter Fisher. Simon Singh, you think homeopathy should not be on the NHS. Why not?
Your face was a treat when James explained that the more you dilute it, the more powerful it becomes.
So it's counterintuitive, isn't it? I don't know how it works.
It's also actually untrue. It is not actually a principle of homeopathy at all. They're qualitatively different, but they do not. It is not said that they get more stronger.
Okay, that's the first I've ever heard about. But the bottom line is, it doesn't work. The best available evidence, if you talk to the chief medical officer, if you talk to the editors of the best academic medical journals, they will tell you that homeopathy does not work. So for me, it's simply a case of, with limited resources, should the NHS be wasting money on drugs that do not work when they could be spending those money on drugs, therapies, massages, operations, nurses, which do really work? Now, Jay's made a very good point about the placebo effect. There is a placebo effect that does come with homeopathy. But placebo effects come with every treatment. So I could either give you something that really helps with your hay fever and has a placebo effect on top, or I can shortchange you and give you a sugar pill that only has a placebo effect. Now, I think in anybody's book, it's sensible to only spend money on treatments that work, which means that homeopathy needs to be on the blacklist.
Okay, Dr. Peter Fisher, you're a medical doctor and you do prescribe homeopathy.
Yes,
Tell us why.
Because it works, because actually the evidence on this particular question, what happens if you add homeopathy into general practice, which is really the question that's under debate here, is very clear. There's been quite a number of studies totaling around about 10,000 patients, mostly done in France and Germany, where you have quite large numbers of GPs who use homeopathy, but some in the UK as well. And what you find is consistently, unanimously, all these studies have shown that GPs who integrate homeopathy into their practice get better results, either just in terms of the patient gets better quicker, or very importantly, they use less drugs. The patient improves, does just as well, but with many less drugs. For instance, half as many sleeping tablets.
England's most senior doctor, Professor Dame Sally Davis, has spoken about homeopathy. She said she's perpetually surprised that it's provided on the NHS, and she says homeopaths are peddlers. What do you say to that?
Well, I say it's outrageous. I don't accept that at all.
She's the most senior doctor.
Yes, and I indeed worked with her many years ago. We were colleagues in the Central Middlesex Hospital. But I don't think that's correct at all. And the most recent review of clinical trials of homeopathy against placebo, done by the Robertson Centre for Biostatistics at the University of Glasgow,
I can guarantee you
came to a clear positive conclusion that it is not a placebo.
I can guarantee that the Chief Medical Officer will not be changing her opinion based on that study. I think the second really important issue here is that lots of people spend money on homeopathy privately. Now, why do they do that? I think they do it because the NHS funds it. And if the NHS funds it, they assume it must be effective. And there are parents who spend money on homeopathy for their children when it doesn't work. There are homeopaths who go off to West Africa to try and treat Ebola. It clearly doesn't work. There are homeopathic charities that will try and treat people with malaria and HIV in Southern Africa. What the NHS does is the tip of the iceberg, but it gives credibility to a whole industry beneath it, which I know Professor Fisher condemns as well. And that's the other problem which we also need to sort out.
Just looking at papers that have been published, one statistic that's quoted by the British Homeopathic Association is that up until the end of 2014, 104 papers were published on 61 different medical conditions under strict controls, and of those papers, 41% reported on balance there was positive evidence, 5% on balance negative evidence, and 54% were not conclusively one way or another. It does seem to tip the balance in the positive, Cam.
That's the kind of Christine Keeler effect. They would say that, wouldn't they? It's about the quality of studies. Do studies have independent controls? Are they randomized? Do they have large group samples? In medicine, doctors and researchers conduct what are called a meta-analysis, where they look at a body or pool of data. The Australian government did it earlier this year. And you apply criteria. You say, well, these are good studies, and we're going to focus on those, and these are poor and misleading studies, which we're going to ignore. And when you apply those cuts, when you apply those criteria, there is nothing there for homeopathy.
Precisely that issue was addressed by this study from the University of Glasgow. They looked at them, hierarchized them in terms of quality, and their conclusions remain the same for the highest quality as for the not so high quality.
If homeopathy is effective, you and they and everybody else will win a Nobel Prize, and I'll be the first one on the front row in Sweden applauding you, but I can guarantee you it does not work.
Well, listen to this then. Chaz has tweeted to say homeopathy works on animals, so the placebo argument is a non-starter. How do you explain that?
I think science is a tremendously open-minded enterprise. Science will look at the weirdest ideas like black holes and dark matter and stuff that is unbelievable. Now, to me, that's unbelievable, but science is open-minded, so science conducts research studies and says, well, look, let's get 100 cattle here with mastitis and 100 cows here with mastitis. Let's give one group homeopathy, let's give another group a placebo or sugar pill, and there's no significant difference. Now, what's happening there is that owners of pets will want their pets to improve, and they will look for signs of improvement, and they're kidding themselves, I'm afraid.
Just very brief final thought, Peter. If you can't prescribe homeopathy on the NHS anymore, what impact would that have for you?
It'll have a negative effect, particularly, I mean, homeopathic medicines are quite cheap. People who pay prescription fees won't actually spend a lot more if they buy it for themselves. But for people who are exempt from prescription fees, retired people, unemployed people, children, it will make a big difference. They won't be able to get them.
Thank you all very much, and thank you for your comments, and keep them coming on that and everything else we're talking about today. Now though, let's catch up with the weather. Carol has the details. Hey Carol.
Thanks Joanna. Well, it's been fairly lively, I must say, as we've gone through the course of this morning, all courtesy of our first named storm of the season, Abigail. Is now moving northeastwards. It's reached its peak, and what you'll find is if you look at the isobars across this chart, it still is going to be fairly windy, but it will be replaced by this ex-Hurricane Kate coming our way this weekend. It will still be windy with ex-Hurricane Kate, but by then it's rain that we really are looking at as potentially being a problem. Now, we've seen quite a lot of rain this morning already. We've had some showers. Some of them have been quite squally, accompanied by gusty winds. They're moving eastwards, and we've had snow across the hills and mountains of Scotland, some snow across the hills and mountains of Northern England and also Northern Ireland, but that will be fairly transient. So in between all of those showers, we will see some dry spells and also some sunshine. Into the afternoon, the status quo prevails across Scotland, with the winds very slowly moderating. It's going to feel much colder across the board than it has done of late. And across Northern England, still some hefty showers. Some of those could be thundery as well, interspersed with bright skies or indeed some sunshine. Still those showers again peppering Northern Ireland and across much of England and also Wales. And it still will be a blustery afternoon, and again feeling colder than it has done in the last few weeks. Now, as we head on through the evening and overnight, the winds continue to ease a touch. They'll pick up for a time during the night. There still will be a lot of showers, but there'll be a lot of dry weather as well. But you can see what's waiting in the wings. This is coming our way. And compared to recent nights, once again, it is going to be a fairly cold one in prospect. So as we head into Saturday, this is the remnants of the Hurricane Kate coming our way. It will have tropical air embedded in it, which means that we're seeing higher temperatures, but a lot of rain. Northern Scotland staying driest. And then as we head on into Sunday, we still will have all this rain. In fact, we could see an exceptional amount of rain, particularly with height across the Pennines and Snowdonia, but even at lower levels widely, we could see 20 to 40 millimetres. That is getting on for an inch and a half. Could lead to some localised flooding problems, including with the rivers, so do stay tuned to the weather forecast.
Hello, it's just after 10. It's Friday the 13th. I'm Joanna Gosling in for Victoria. Welcome to the programme if you've just joined us. Coming up before 11, has so-called Jihadi John been killed by US forces in Syria? We'll be live in Washington and Downing Street for the very latest.
If he has been killed, that would really be quite a crushing blow in terms of its symbolic value.
We'll be live at Bristol Crown Court as Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare are sentenced for killing teenager Becky Watts. And do you need a degree to be a good copper? There's a suggestion that new recruits should be university educated, but is it necessary? Now, our main news this morning. The Islamic State killer Jihadi John is targeted by a US airstrike. Sources say there is a high degree of certainty that Mohammed Emwazi is dead. He appeared in beheading videos of Western hostages. The nephew of Alan Henning, one of those murdered, has given the first family reaction. He said he wanted the coward behind the mask to suffer, but also glad it's been destroyed. The government has sold off more of the Northern Rock Bank. Chancellor George Osborne says it sold £13 billion worth of mortgages to a private investment company. Northern Rock's collapse and nationalisation in 2008 marked the start of the UK financial crisis, but the government has now sold around 85% of its assets. The couple who killed Becky Watts are sentenced today at Bristol Crown Court. Earlier this week, a jury took less than 4 hours to find 28-year-old Nathan Matthews guilty of the murder of his stepsister and his 21-year-old girlfriend Shauna Hoare guilty of manslaughter. The teenager was killed in a sexually motivated kidnap plot in February. Decades of army-backed rule in Burma are to be brought to an end with a resounding victory by the former political prisoner Aung San Suu Kyi. Her party's majority in parliament was confirmed 5 years to the day after she was finally released from house arrest. Lunch with the Queen for the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi today. Then he'll address a mass crowd at Wembley Stadium of up to 60,000 people. His visit to the UK has seen Britain and India announce a series of trade deals worth around £10 billion. There have also been human rights protests. Schools have been closed, ferries cancelled and power supplies cut as Storm Abigail hits northern Scotland and the Western Isles. It's the first storm to be named in the UK. There have been windy gusts of 84 miles an hour. Radio 2 presenter Dermot O'Leary will step into Sir Terry Wogan's shoes for children in need tonight. Sir Terry is missing the fundraiser for the first time because of back problems. Right, let's catch up with all the sport. Hugh has the details, and as we've been discussing, Hugh, a big day for Russian athletics.
Hello again, Joanna. Yes, you've been talking about it already this morning. Russia will find out later today what sanctions the IAAF will impose following the World Anti-Doping Agency report earlier this week. That report, you'll remember, accused Russia of state-sponsored doping. Now, Russia's Athletics Federation submitted its response last night to the IAAF ahead of the governing body's final decision. The Russian sports minister has been quoted as saying they may create a new anti-doping agency to address those concerns and that they're ready to reform. Of course, one option the IAAF may consider is banning Russian athletes from next year's Olympic Games. The British 400-metre runner Martin Rooney thinks that would be unfair.
I'm sympathetic to the clean athletes. I don't believe that every athlete in Russia is on drugs. I think there's some very talented athletes from Russia. So it'd be very unfair. Guys who are going for an Olympic medal have that opportunity taken away from them. We have a very short career. So I do have sympathy for those guys, but there needs to be some kind of strong message from the IAAF. It's going to be a tough decision whoever has to make it, but I just, if they ban everyone, it's just not fair on the people who have toiled and put their body through everything just to have that opportunity taken away from them.
So, some of the candidates have already ruled themselves out of the job, but Jake White has told the BBC he would take the role of England Rugby Union head coach if he was offered it. The South African, who won the World Cup with the Springboks in 2007, says he could do the same with England if he's chosen to replace Stuart Lancaster. White is currently coaching Montpellier, but he's the bookmakers' favourite to take over. England, Wales and Northern Ireland all play friendly matches this evening with their qualifications for next year's European Championships already assured. It's a chance for new managers to try out new members of their squads, of course, tonight. But the stakes are much higher for the Republic of Ireland. Martin O'Neill's side play the first leg of their playoff against Bosnia-Herzegovina tonight to try and earn their spot at Euro 2016. Radio 5 Live commentator Conor McNamara is in Sarajevo now for us. Conor, huge game for Martin O'Neill's men. Is there a weight of expectation for them?
Well, I think there is. I think if you look back even just 6 months, Hugh, the Republic of Ireland would have been delighted just to get to these playoffs. So now that you're here, you could say, well, there's nothing to lose. But also, having been to Euro 2012 last time round, there's a hunger for the Irish players and for the Irish supporters to join England and Wales and Northern Ireland and get to that in France next summer. Republic of Ireland go into this first leg with quite a few absentees. Shane Long is injured. He scored the goal in that recent famous win against Germany. John Walters is suspended. So too is John O'Shea. Shay Given is injured. There's a sort of spine of the team missing. Not been a great few months, Hugh, for Irish injuries with the Rugby World Cup and Paul O'Connell and Johnny Sexton and company, with Terry Wogan missing out on Children in Lead due to a back injury. So hopefully some of those injury doubts will be back in shape by the time the second leg comes around in Dublin on Monday. We'll have commentary of that on BBC Radio 5 Live. I think if you offered Martin O'Neill...
Okay, thanks, Connor. Sorry about the technological problems there. And they'll be hoping for better weather conditions in Bosnia than there were in Argentina last night, when heavy rain in Buenos Aires forced the cancellation of the match between Argentina and Brazil. The pitch was waterlogged and there were problems across the city. The World Cup qualifier will now be played tonight. So it seems you can't escape the lashings of Storm Abigail, even in Brazil, Joanna. That's all the sport for now. I'll be back at 10:30.
Lovely. See you later. Thank you. Thank you for joining us this morning. Welcome to the programme if you just joined us. We're on BBC Two and the BBC News channel until 11 this morning. Lots of you getting in touch with us about our conversation just before the news and sport on homeopathy. And here's just a flavour of your comments. Penny has texted to say, my 18-month-old son had numerous courses of antibiotics. After homeopathic treatment, we didn't see a doctor for 2 years. Placebo effect, she asks, on a toddler. Tweet from Lorraine, I have successfully used homeopathic remedies on animals. Animals do not understand the placebo effect. Richard has emailed to say, I'm so tired of hearing these arrogant attacks on homeopathy which ignore both the experience of many people, including myself, and the historical record which shows that natural remedies have been effective ever since man walked the earth. Even now, conventional medicine is looking at the natural world for remedies because laboratory-produced medications are overprescribed and becoming less effective. Matt has tweeted to say, as a GP, I would not advocate prescribing something which has no scientific basis or evidence to support it. And Sean on Facebook, should be banned from the NHS, absolutely no scientific merit. Thank you for all those comments. Do keep them coming. Your contributions to this programme and your expertise are key. Text will be charged at the standard network rate. And you can watch the programme online wherever you are via the BBC News app or on the website bbc.co.uk/Victoria. You can also subscribe to all our features on the News app by going to Add Topics and searching Victoria Derbyshire. US forces say they believe they have killed the self-styled Islamic State militant known as Jihadi John. Mohammed Emwazi, the Kuwaiti-born British militant, appeared in many of the hostage beheading videos by the group known as ISIS and became notorious for his London accent and wearing a black robe with a balaclava covering his face. The US Pentagon says it has targeted him in a drone strike near Raqqa in Syria, and according to a senior military source, there is a high certainty that he was hit. But who was Jihadi John, and how did he end up as a jihadi?
If there were changes, they happened later. Certainly if there was anything going on while he was in school, the school had no knowledge or idea that that was what was happening, if it was happening.
Well, in the last few minutes, the nephew of Alan Henning, a British aid worker who was killed by IS in Syria, has tweeted to say, mixed feelings today, wanted the coward behind the mask to suffer the way Alan and his friends did, but also glad it's been destroyed. David Cameron is due to speak about this later. Downing Street has issued a brief statement this morning. It says, "We have been working hand in glove with the Americans to defeat ISIL and to hunt down those murdering hostages. The Prime Minister has said before that tracking down these brutal murderers was a top priority." Well, our correspondent Gary O'Donoghue has reaction to this news in the States, and our political correspondent Chris Mason is in Downing Street, where the Prime Minister will make a statement a little later. Gary, first of all, what have you heard about this operation?
Well, the details of it are starting to become clearer now. It happened after dark on Thursday evening, local time, in Syria. And what we know is that the Americans, the coalition, have been tracking John Mohammed Emwazi for some time, they say. And they targeted him in a vehicle in Raqqa. We think there were at least one or two, possibly more people in that vehicle too, and it was hit. Now, I've been told that it was a direct hit. It was a great strike, as one individual put it to me. And they believe there was a high degree of certainty that he was killed. Now, officially they're saying, look, we're going to assess the operation and see what was actually achieved. They won't go as far formally to say that they definitely killed him. And the process now is to try and verify that. And they do that by talking to human intelligence sources on the ground, in other words, spies they have around there. They monitor text messages, emails, phone calls, all those kinds of things to try and verify this fact before they can be absolutely certain. But that's the state of things at the moment. But I think the speed with which they came out and said that they thought they'd killed him and that they were pretty certain about it is an indication of their confidence. Having said that, they have in the past claimed to have killed people who have then popped up elsewhere.
If he has been killed, how much of a coup would America see this as being?
I mean, this would be a major coup for both Washington and London. I mean, not particularly because Jihadi John was a senior figure in the sort of military structure of IS. I don't think he was particularly senior in that sense, but he represented the whole propaganda, the sophisticated propaganda successes that IS had delivered over the last year or more. He featured strongly, of course, everyone remembers, they believe in those videos, the videos of the Western hostages, those chilling videos that sort of bounced around the world and horrified many countries, most countries, but also acted as a recruiting sergeant for many Islamic militants who came to Syria as a result of seeing things like that. So it will be a significant coup in the propaganda war.
Chris, what reaction at Downing Street?
Well, we are expecting a statement from the Prime Minister shortly. In a statement issued by text a little earlier this morning, Number 10 emphasising that the UK and Washington have been working hand in glove in tracking down those enemies as they see them within ISIL over the last few months. You'll remember that the Prime Minister, a year ago when we heard of those horrendous videos emerging out of Syria, regarded Mohammed Emwazi's acts as pure evil. So the UK and Washington have been working very closely, trying to track him down ever since. And as Gary was saying, symbolically, it would be a huge moment if this death was confirmed. And the fact that we're expecting to hear from the Prime Minister on camera shortly gives you some sense of how credible this appears to be and how they seem to have amassed as much evidence as is feasible at this stage to be as certain as they can that they've killed him.
And the fact that the Prime Minister coming out so quickly after the reports emerged, a sign of how important they see this as being in Downing Street.
Yeah, absolutely. They regard this as a hugely important moment. They say they've been keeping an eye on what's been going on. For months they've been working very, very closely with the United States to try and ensure that they could track down and keep an eye on the movements of Mohammed Emwazi. He's somebody who, from a propaganda perspective for the Islamic State group has been hugely important, appearing in those videos, a face that has been seen around the world in those videos, and because there he was with a British accent appearing in the deserts of Syria, particularly with those British hostages prior to their death when they were looking so horrendously and understandably scared. If there is news that confirms his death, and as I say, it would appear that both America and London are pretty confident of that, then yeah, that would be a huge moment, and we're expecting a statement, I guess, pretty soon, perhaps as soon as 10 minutes' time.
So when Downing Street says the UK has been working hand in glove with the US, is it clear whether there was any British involvement in this particular operation directly?
We don't know yet, is the honest answer to that. We simply don't know exactly who was involved, other than to say that Downing Street emphasised that they have been working very closely over the last few months in keeping an eye on him and tracking others within the so-called Islamic State group. The news overnight from military sources was emerging out of Washington, which would suggest at this stage that it was a US-led drone attack. But perhaps we'll get further information from the Prime Minister. But as I say, we do expect to hear in the street, in Downing Street, within the next 10 minutes or so.
Thank you both, Chris Mason and Gary O'Donoghue. Thank you. Still to come, do police officers need degrees? There's a suggestion this morning that police recruits should have one, but is it really necessary? We'll be finding out. Now, a drive to cut the number of stillbirths and deaths among new babies by half over the next 15 years has been launched. 1 in every 200 babies is stillborn, and the government wants to reduce those numbers, as well as the amount of the number of neonatal deaths, maternal deaths and brain injuries that occur during or soon after birth by 20% by 2020 and 50% by 2030. The Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, is pledging an extra £4 million of funding for hospitals in England, which works out at around £25,000 for every hospital trust. So how much of a difference will that actually make? Well, we can talk to Will Quince, Conservative MP for Colchester, whose baby was stillborn in 2014. And also here in the studio, Emma Jones and Chris Goodger, who lost 2 babies which were born prematurely in 2012 and 2013. Thank you all for joining us. Emma and Chris, first of all, tell us what your experiences were.
They were both very different. When we had Tyler, he was born by surprise in May 2012. Just went into labour, normal, but I was only 22 weeks at the time. He was born premature, obviously, and he was stillborn. We came to terms with it. We held the funeral, and we dealt with it as a family more than any help from the hospital. No bereavement, no counselling, anything like that. And then we were expecting our second son then, Riley, but he also then came along unexpectedly early at 22 weeks and 4 days.
So he was through terrible times.
Yeah.
You've been campaigning for change since. What things would have made a difference for you, particularly with Tyler?
Well, more than anything, I think it would have been the support from the hospitals. They were both seen very differently. Because Tyler was stillborn, there was nothing they could do to help after. And because I was at low risk, well, once I delivered him, he was already gone.
But in terms of support in a
there
hospital
was
after a stillbirth?
No bereavement support, anything like that at all. It was, we're very sorry, stay a few days with the baby and go home.
So you had to go through the full labour, did you?
Yeah, the full labour. A long labour and the funeral. Yeah.
And so money is being put into the system to try to improve things. What sort of things would you like to see money put into?
Well, as much as I know it is being funded for England at the moment. With me coming from Wales, I am hoping that this also happens within Wales, because
Welsh hospitals.
Yeah, because at the moment we're still going to be in the same rut. These babies are being left, and I have a lot of friends that sadly did go full term, which I met through organisation SANS, and they said if there was more scans, if they were looked at more closely, if things were done quicker,
more specialist
care,
those deaths could be avoided.
They could have been avoided.
Let's talk to Will Quince. He's an MP, and Will, I know that you had a stillborn son a year ago. Obviously, very difficult for your family to go through that as well. Tell us what happened for you.
Yeah, massively. If I can just firstly say my heart goes out to Emma and Chris, because I do know how they feel. Our son, Robert, he had a very rare chromosomal disorder called Edwards syndrome, and he was stillborn at full term last year in October at Colchester General Hospital.
And money is now being put into hospitals to try to reduce the number of stillborn children. It's £4 million. That's £25,000 for each hospital trust. Do you think it's money that's going to make much of a difference?
I think it is going to make a huge amount of difference, because a lot of that money is going to be spent on training, but also on monitoring equipment, especially in the later stages of pregnancy. But for me, it's more of a focus, and this is why I'm really excited about the announcement today, a focus on bereavement, but also on stillbirth and neonatal death, because it's absolutely shocking how badly we perform as a country versus the Western world. And it's an absolute focus. It's something we should have done a long time ago, and I'm really proud that the government has taken this initiative on. 5,000 babies. We talk about statistics, but actually we're talking about babies. We're talking about 5,000 plus babies. We're talking about parents. We're talking about families. And having gone through that experience, I can honestly tell you that I will never ever forget what it feels like to see your wife give birth to a lifeless baby, the doctor bring over a stethoscope and put it to your baby's chest and shake his head. I don't want families to go through that process. Every single stillbirth and neonatal death is a tragedy, and I'm proud that this government is taking a stand and are taking steps to address it and halve that number by 2030.
At what stage did you know that your child was going to be or was stillborn?
So we knew from about 22 weeks that Robert had Edwards syndrome, which is a condition described as being not compatible with life. But actually some children with Edwards syndrome do live for a few days, for a few weeks, even in rare occasions for a few years. So we didn't know actually until labour itself at 41 weeks that Robert was going to be stillborn. It was only in the last few moments of pregnancy that we feared the worst. He was breech as well.
Medically, could anything else have been done differently? I suppose what I'm asking is if there had been more medical resources. It doesn't sound like it was a lack of resources in your case that was an issue.
No, it wasn't, Joanna, and actually I've got to praise very highly Colchester General Hospital. The maternity unit is second to none, and we had a specialist bereavement suite. And one of the things I'm campaigning for is a specialist bereavement suite in every hospital in the country, because I think that should be an absolute priority. But part of the problem and the reason for this initiative is the level of care is patchy across the whole of the NHS in England. Some hospitals do it absolutely brilliantly, and sadly in others it's just not done well enough. And getting that consistent level of care across the country is the government's priority, and that's why I'm so proud of the government today. I've been an MP for 6 months, and this is the proudest moment I've had.
Emma and Chris, listening to Matt, to Will, how do you feel about that?
Well, firstly, I do just want to say how sorry I am for what happened with you. I can understand the pain, I can, and even though our son Riley was born, he actually managed to live with us for 93 minutes, even being premature, and I can understand the pain that you went through, and I am very sorry. And I agree with you, this is absolutely fantastic that it has come out. Too many babies do die, and some of them can be saved, and some of them don't have to. I feel that there's scans. I think they can check on the, I understand there's low risk pregnancies, but they can always turn into high risk straight away within minutes. And I feel that people need to be watched a lot more than what they are. And I really hope that after this, being announced today in England, I'm hoping that it comes to Wales So we also can benefit from the change as well. I really do. I really do.
On a personal note for you two, you have been through, as we said, heartache, terrible times trying to have a baby. Your mum's now going to be a surrogate, is that right?
Yes, well, at the moment, we've been to a few hospital appointments, and my body, sadly, in between both boys, I also suffered 2 miscarriages. So I've had 4 pregnancy losses, and my womb can no longer, can't really hold a pregnancy no more. So the option really for us is surrogacy, and my mother is the main person for us, and she's my best friend, and she wants to give us something we really want, which is a baby, and we are going down that route at the moment. Yeah.
Good luck.
I know. I hope so.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you, Emma and Chris, and Will, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Right, let's go to Bristol Crown Court right now. Sentencing has begun in the Becky Watts murder trial. Our correspondent Andrew Plant is there. What's happening, Andrew?
Joanna, we're told there's a very different atmosphere to Wednesday here at Bristol Crown Court today. Less formal in some ways. There is a limited number of seats inside, of course, but the judge has allowed a lot of people who want to be there today to go in and stand, which is a pretty unusual move. We're told there's some 40 members of Becky Watts' family and friends inside wearing T-shirts with Becky's face on. And in the last couple of minutes, we've had a victim impact statement read out to the court on behalf of Becky's father. I'll just read you a bit of that if I can. He has said that Becky is now known as Bristol's angel. He said that we will never understand why this has happened. He called it a plot grown out of hatred and said that they had suffered searing pain and anguish. He also added that they, referring to Becky's stepbrother Nathan Matthews and his girlfriend Shauna Hoare, had sat in his home and watched his descent into hell and madness without any remorse.
How long will sentencing go on for, Andrew?
Well, bear in mind that Becky first went missing 9 months ago here in Bristol. There was a week-and-a-half long search for her, but then police said it was a murder investigation, and very quickly they arrested Becky's stepbrother and his girlfriend too. So it took 9 months to get to court, and we heard 21 days of evidence. Everyone thought then that it would take the jury quite a long time to reach their conclusion, but on Wednesday here they came back with their guilty verdicts in just over 3 hours. So very, very quick. We think today, though, will be a little bit slower. They have to read out the impact statements in court, and then they'll go through sentencing Nathan Matthews for murder and Shauna Hoare for manslaughter.
Thanks, Andrew. Keep us updated. Let's go to Downing Street. David Cameron is commenting on the targeted strike on Jihadi John.
Good morning. Last night, the United States carried out an airstrike in Raqqa, Syria, targeting Mohammed Emwazi, the ISIL executioner known as Jihadi John. We cannot yet be certain if the strike was successful. But let me be clear. I've always said that we would do whatever was necessary, whatever it took, to track down Emwazi and to stop him taking the lives of others. We've been working with the United States literally around the clock to track him down. This was a combined effort, and the contribution of both our countries was essential. Emwazi is a barbaric murderer. He was shown in those sickening videos of the beheading of British aid workers. He posed an ongoing and serious threat to innocent civilians, not only in Syria, but around the world, and in the United Kingdom too. He was ISIL's lead executioner, and let us never forget that he killed many, many Muslims too. And he was intent on murdering many more people. So this was an act of self-defense. It was the right thing to do. Today I want to thank the United States. The United Kingdom has no better friend or ally. And I want to pay tribute to all those professionals in our own security and intelligence agencies and armed forces for the extraordinary work they do on behalf of our country. On this, as so often, they've been working hand in glove with their American colleagues. We are proud of them. Now, if this strike was successful, and we still await confirmation of that, it will be a strike at the heart of ISIL. And it will demonstrate to those who would do Britain our people and our allies' harm, we have a long reach. We have unwavering determination, and we never forget about our citizens. The threat ISIL pose continues. Britain and our allies will not rest until we've defeated this evil terrorist death cult and the poisonous ideology on which it feeds. Today, though, my thoughts and the thoughts of our country are with the families of those who were so brutally murdered. Japanese citizens Kenji Goto and Haruna Yakawa, American journalists Stephen Sotlov and James Foley, and aid worker Abdul Rahman Kasig. And of course our own citizens, aid workers David Haynes and Alan Hemming. Nothing will bring back David and Alan. Their courage and selflessness stand in stark contrast to the empty callousness of their murderers. Their friends and their families should be proud of them, as we are. They were the best of British, and they will be remembered long after the murderers of ISIL are forgotten. Thank you.
Brief statement from
Prime Minister there giving
Cameron on the targeted airstrike on so-called jihadi John Mohammed Emwazi in Syria. No confirmation yet that he was certainly killed in that attack, but the United States is speaking confidently about the strike that Downing Street says was will demonstrate that UK has a long reach and unwavering determination, and the UK will never forget its citizens. Well, let's go to Chris Mason, who is in Downing Street listening to the Prime Minister. Chris, your thoughts?
Well, it was pretty striking that the Prime Minister was keen to come out and give this statement as quickly as he did after that news emerged out of Washington overnight, and also that he chose to do it here in the street behind the Downing Street lectern. Gives you some sense of the gravity of this moment as Downing Street sees it. Now, the Prime Minister did emphasise, didn't he, right at the top of that statement, that they haven't yet got complete confirmation that they've managed to kill Mohammed Emwazi, but I think his willingness to give this statement in the street here, behind that lectern so quickly after the news emerged, gives you some sense of the confidence that, as far as they can tell, with the best information that they have at this stage, they are pretty confident that they have got their man. We also learned, didn't we, about the detail, a little more of the detail about the working relationship between the US and the UK.